All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Alan. It's Friday night. You are on Heavy Metallurgy here on YouTube. We are bringing you another fun stream. This is a pre recorded episode, though. We don't do these, excuse me, very often, but sometimes we've got guests lined up in other time zones. They can't stay up until the wee hours on a Friday night. So Marty and I are here to record an episode today and preview it on a future Friday. We've got a cool guest making his first appearance. But before we get into that, Marty, how are things this lovely, for us, Saturday afternoon?
Doing good, doing good. It's doing it every once in a while when the sun's shining is a little strange, but it's good. And we have to do these, like you said, to accommodate folks that are in different time zone. Not everybody is hell bent on staying up all night like Roger or Jurgen or
Nope.
Metal Mickey on occasion, but no, it's a nice option to have, and we're psyched to be able to have this guy on. Why don't you bring him on, Alan?
I will. Just, one other quick thing though before I do, just for folks who are watching live on Friday night, Marty and I will be in the chat talking to you all live, so we'll still be interacting with you. We'll actually probably get to interact with you more because we'll be paying more attention to the chat since we're not live on screen. And we'll try to remember to remind folks of this. Some viewers are going to come in a little bit late and wonder why the heck we're not putting comments on screen tonight. But yeah, we'll be there in the live chat hanging out. But yeah, without further ado, let's bring out our guest. This is Kristian from Sweden. Kristian.
Hey guys.
Welcome.
Thank you so much
Welcome
for
and
joining us. It's been a long time coming. We've been trying to schedule Kristian for a while, but it has finally happened. Glad to do it.
Yes,
A few of you may recognize.
Oh,
we appreciate you taking the time to do it. So a few of you may recognize Kristian. He did a video with me over on my channel, Let's Talk Metal. It's been a year or two ago at this point on US Metal Singles. But yeah, we wanted to bring him back for a Metallurgy episode as well.
So, Kristian, when are you going to drink the Kool-Aid and start your own channel? Is the next question. You've dipped your toe twice now. So when does this spill over into the streams and rivers of Sweden and open up your own?
Just say that I'm perfectly fine being a guest.
Oh, that's what they all say.
That is quite all right. Nope. Yeah, we had a great conversation on Let's Talk Metal, and we'll have a great one tonight. But for folks who maybe aren't familiar with your background, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your heavy metal journey, how you got here, whatever you're comfortable sharing with everybody here on YouTube?
Well, I won't take up too much of your time, but I started pretty late, I guess. I'm born in the 70s, like most of the folks. And I didn't really start collecting metal until perhaps 2003, 2004, something.
Okay.
I listened to it before, but, didn't really appreciate holding special rare items in my hands until up to then, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was the usual. I started collecting new wave of British heavy metal singles, and when I couldn't really afford more of those, I had some weird idea that I wasn't supposed to spend more than 250 Swedish crowns on a single item, which is like $25. So I made it my mission to try and get the best collection I could, spending just $25 for each item.
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
it gets hard really quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Impossible. It's fucking impossible.
So I needed to branch out a bit, and I suppose the US scene at that time seemed quite intriguing because nobody had heard any of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the singles were unknown, so I could still get them for less than $25.
Yep.
And that's been it. Actually, I've been spending my time collecting things that I like, but also things just because they belong to a certain genre.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's a bit slow, I think, because of, situation in the world. So my collection has, I'm not really sure I should say stagnated, but I've actually moved on quite a bit to CDs. Oh no, hate comments in the chat.
That's the way a lot of it's going because people are sick of paying ridiculous prices for new records,
Yes.
Let alone collectible artifacts. You know what I mean?
And CDs, I can still buy used CDs for $2. So
Yeah.
it's more bang for the buck.
True.
Yep. Very much so. Yep. And yeah, I mean, all price aside, Kristian has, built, a really impressive collection, and he's done a lot of work with some online sites and forums, sort of helping, curate lists and getting, more information about a lot of those more obscure US metal releases from like the 80s and I guess into the early 90s out there. Because yeah, a lot of those records are still very unknown even to this day for folks. And Kristian's played a big role in helping get more information out there about them. Yeah, you're doing the Lord's work, son. But yeah, so once we got schedules lined up to get Kristian on here, next question is always, what topic would you like to talk about? We always try to let the guests pick something because yeah, we want it to be a discussion they're really eager to have. And Kristian came up with a really cool topic, wanting to discuss heavy metal in the UK, but after the new wave of British heavy metal, not during it. So we're going to be starting. We decided, 1985 would be our start date and kind of move forward from there. But Kristian, why did this particular topic kind of appeal to you? What made you throw this one out as a suggestion?
Well, I threw many suggestions because you wanted a topic, and I picked a few that I thought were sort of under discussed. Or sort of unknown. It's always been intriguing to me that Britain has always been like at the forefront of heavy metal, beginning from 1970 and onwards with the new wave of British heavy metal. But then something happened, and in the late 80s or during the 90s, Britain doesn't really have much of a showing in the metal scene. I mean, there are some of the death metal bands and so on, but most of it is quite unknown. And again, I'm a big fan of the unknown, so I thought perhaps we should discuss if there are at least some good bands from the UK from this time period. Why aren't there more? We'll see if we can figure something out.
You really can't say it's a small country syndrome, because look at countries like Finland, for example, or any of the northern countries. They're not huge countries, but there's more metal bands per capita than a lot of bigger countries. It's crazy. So it can't be that. That's not the reason.
Well, yeah, and like Kristian said too, the UK has always been kind of the epicenter for heavy metal. Almost short of Metallica, probably the other 3 or 4 or 5 biggest bands of all time. They're all British bands. It's where a lot of the different movements and styles have developed over time. And then, yeah, there's this kind of, it's almost like you're watching, a documentary on the history of heavy metal, and you get to about 1985, and there's just like, all of a sudden the little clip comes up and says, scene missing. And the next thing you know, it's like the early 90s with the Peaceville 3 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a weird time frame, and it's something Marty and I have touched on in a bunch of different episodes. It will come up when we're talking about the history of thrash, or
thrash in particular. Thrash is a big one.
Thrash is a big one, but we talk about it, with the history of power metal, early death metal and grind and stuff. So yeah, it's something we've touched on a lot of times, but we never had actually dedicated an episode to it. So I think it's a cool one for us to dive into for this particular episode. So we can kind of go around and share any thoughts or observations on the topic. So Kristian, I'm betting you do have some maybe theories or stuff about what did happen, around that 1984-1985 divide that maybe started to change things for the British the UK heavy metal scene.
You got me there, Alan. I don't know. Perhaps it's the saturation effect. I don't know if people were fed up with the new wave of British heavy metal and just wanted to move on to something completely different. I don't know. I'm not really that deep into this subject so that I can say something with authority here.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, didn't mean to put you on the spot, Marty. Marty, any thoughts or insights about it that you've got in mind?
I don't know, and I'm going to have to side with Kristian here. I don't know. It just seems like England, you talked about it has some very influential bands, and not just in metal, in pop and goth music. I mean, England is an epicenter for a lot of things, and one of them being punk.
Yep.
And that is one style that has permeated into the metal category for England quite substantially, I think. More so than I think people realize. And, we just had a conversation with Albert from Decibel about Napalm Death. You listen to that early, punk turns into crust, or anarcho punk turns into crust punk. And all of a sudden you've got these young British guys getting into that and amping it up, speeding it up. And before you know it, you've got grindcore. You've got, and even some of the UK thrash that we'll show tonight has got elements of punk in it. So I don't know if the punk influence might have had something to do with it. I don't know. But other than that, Kristian and I were talking in the bunker backstage before, and thrash metal bands they struggled. It feels like they came in late to the party, and the ones that did, bands like Zentrix, for example, I've never, my unfortunate first Zentrix purchase was the Ghostbusters cassette single. I listened to that thing, I'm like, what the hell is this garbage? It's garbage. And then I did a thing with Metal Mickey. He's an English guy, and he's been on our
great
show
YouTube
before.
channel, lots of fun.
YouTube channel. One of my missions was to listen. He made me listen to Zentrix Shattered Existence, which I think is their debut album.
Oh, right. You guys picked one album for each other.
Two albums for each guy that they hadn't heard and might try to turn them on to. And you know what? It was decent, but it was reanimated Testament riffs. I mean, not even trying to hide it. It seemed like they're behind the times, and they didn't really have their own voice. Which is a generalization. There were bands, of course, that did have their own voice, and which hopefully we'll touch upon some of them this afternoon. But yeah, to answer your question, Alan, I don't know. I don't know the answer here either. I've rambled on a long way and come back to a circle of I don't know.
No, you made some good points.
The punk thing, it seems like punk has influenced metal in England a bit more than it may have in other areas of the world. What do you think on the whole thing?
I've got some different puzzle pieces to throw out there on the topic, because it's something I have wondered about and thought about and read about too. I'll point out some stuff. Yeah. One thing is that there's no set start date for new wave of British heavy metal, but most folks would agree it's up and going by 79. And so by the time you get to the end of 84, that's 5 years. And for a music scene, that's a very long time during that late 20th century period of history. Music scenes tended to change and evolve very rapidly. With 2 or 3 years, a scene could come and go and be replaced with something very different. So yeah, I think, Kristian had, a good point when we started, that to some extent, it was kind of probably just, getting a bit worn out. Some people were tired of it. And in particular, some of the music press in Britain was showing signs of being really sick and tired of it. Britain, of course, has had, a very robust music press in the past with all these weekly publications like Sounds and Enemy. And, they did a lot to support and kind of hype up the new wave of British heavy metal in the early years. But when you get to 83, they were actually starting to slag on a lot of those bands. And this is something, this is before my time. So, I've read this, secondhand. Guys like, John Tucker documents some of this in some of his books. This one is, the Susie Smiled book, which one of our longtime viewers, Frank, sent me a copy of this because I could not find a copy for a good price. So big thanks to Frank. And one thing that's nice with Tucker is, he was there at the time, and he has all the old issues of the different zines. So, and he'll actually, dig up and directly quote them. And so, he mentions it in 83, you had people in the music press starting to get real snarky towards new wave of British heavy metal bands, saying things like, oh God, here's another one of those bands. This stuff was cool 2 or 3 years ago, and now it's just, same old boring slop. So you definitely seem to have people getting tired of it around that time. I think that is one part of the puzzle that, Kristian, you identified correctly. Another thing that happens right around there is, from 83, you have this occurs to the new wave of British heavy metal. Def Leppard releases Pyromania, and Def Leppard can deny it all they want to, but they were, once upon a time, a new wave of British heavy metal band.
Yeah.
But with this album, coming out and sort of, going absolutely global, it kind of changed the bar for what these bands were supposed to be capable of. You have all these other, contemporaries of Def Leppard, and all of a sudden their label or their manager, their producer looking at them is just like, why don't you have a Pyromania? Why don't you try to do what Def Leppard just did? Which, of course, musically, this is already going in a much different kind of direction. It's, built to be a million bestseller. As some of those other bands, that's not what they set out to do. It's not maybe something they were capable of doing. They maybe didn't have the resources to do it. But all of a sudden, there's pressure on those bands to try to copy the success of this album. And that puts them in a tough spot. Because this is when you start to see some of those bands that had been very, sort of straightforward, no holds barred metal bands. Hair gets a little poofier. Shirts get a little frillier. Pants get a little more stripy and spandexy and pastel covered and stuff. And it doesn't go over well because a lot of the fans weren't buying it. I mentioned that the music press was down on the new wave of British heavy metal by this time, but letters they were getting from audience members were not on the same page. It literally, in some cases, again, Tucker cites, lots of examples of reader submitted letters being like, why are you guys so down on British bands? Why are you not talking about more of these cool British bands that are up and coming right now? Why aren't you talking about Avenger? Why aren't you talking, about, stuff on Ebony and treating it like it's garbage? So fans still had an appetite for it, but the bands are being pushed in a different direction by, the success of Def Leppard and, by the press just really now starting to come down. The British press has always been, notoriously fickle. When they like you, they love you. And as soon as they're done with you, they flush you down the toilet hard. So I think that's, the Pyromania effect is happening. And then the last big piece of the puzzle I wanted to mention was Tucker also mentions in his book that starting like 83 into 84, there's a big influx of American metal onto British shores. We usually think of things as like a British invasion of, the United States happening on multiple occasions, from the Beatles and, other waves of music. Tucker mentions though that 83 and 84, you started seeing more and more American bands showing up in the UK, bands getting to tour, getting added on, maybe opening for Iron Maiden and stuff like that. And those were the albums that people in the press were all of a sudden kind of all googly-eyed about and starting to hype up. Some of these were, bona fide metal bands like Metallica getting to play in London around that time. Some of them were bands, that today we think of as being very much on the lighter side of things. Acts like, Motley Crue and Twisted Sister. But at the time, those were hot bands in America, and they started to get traction in the UK and also in Europe. And more of that stuff was coming out in those territories too. Tucker mentions in particular, there was a new British label started in 83, Music for Nations. Fans, collectors will know this name. But Music for Nations wasn't just releasing a ton of, homegrown acts. They weren't really focused on the UK metal scene. The success Music for Nations had was licensing stuff from other territories. This is just one of their old compilations, but there's a few British acts on it. But again, who does it feature? Metallica. Who does it feature? Wasp. Merciful Fate, Exciter, Agent Steel, bringing
Rogue Mail.
Rogue Mail. Yeah. Okay. Some of these bands went on to bigger fame and fortune than others.
Others died quickly. Yes.
Yeah, and there are a couple of British bands in the mix too. Tank, being one of them, but a lot of it is acts from other countries. And so, whereas for several years leading up to this, there'd been all this focus on this kind of homegrown grassroots scene of the new wave of British heavy metal. By at the end of 84 and into 85, there's just a lot of forces that are turning the spotlight onto metal from other territories. And I think, to your very astute point, Marty, I think this is why we start to hear a lot of as UK thrash bands turn up, they sound like American bands because they were being like, here's this new thing from America called thrash. Here, have all the Metallica albums when they were released in the UK. They were Music for Nations presents. Here, check this out.
And really, not to break into what you're saying here, but by the time a band like Metallica or Motley Crue or Rat makes it to England, that's usually they've got a groundswell of popularity behind them to be able to go to other markets to tour. So this is often 2-3 years into their career. So it's already happened in America, and now it's going to other places, and there's no internet for all these kids to get on the same page with what's going on as it's happening. So that could be, Metallica hits England, 3 years into their lifespan. They put out a couple records. They've gotten big other places, and now you've inspired a bunch of other bands to start up. Takes a band, a year, 2 years to get their demo and their wheels turning. By the time British thrash hits, it's already starting to fizzle out a bit in other places of the world. So it's that's a great I think you answered your question very well. Yes.
It's part of it, but yeah, it would explain why why on American shores, the First Testament album is a step late to the scene. But for the British audience, it might have been one of the first ones they got exposed to,
and they love it. Talking to Metal Mickey and Mark G. I mean, The Legacy is one of those impactful thrash albums that the Brits love. They love it.
Yeah, and so it's
still
not
to this
just a
day
matter
they love
of
Testament.
Yeah, so I don't think it's just necessarily a matter of taste that they latched onto Testament for some reason. I think it's a matter of timing that that's that was their introduction to thrash. Thrash was kind of the first American-made metal scene, whereas the new wave of British heavy metal, of course, got metal updated in the 80s and exported it to everyone else. But with thrash, that was an import for the UK. So they had to kind of emulate the heroes they were hearing when they got to hear them finally. So yeah, and that's probably not, a complete picture of why there's so many changes, but it's some of I think there's puzzle pieces there that kind of, highlight why we start to see the new wave of British heavy metal fade very quickly. And it's important to note, while like Kristian said, there's kind of this weird, lull, but it's not like every band's gone away. There's still a lot of bands that are soldiering on or new bands trying things, which is what we're going to focus on more tonight. But any other thoughts on kind of the transition that folks wanted to touch on? I talked a lot there. I'm sorry.
Is this the time to confess that I really, really like the first Rogue Mail album?
That's quite okay. No, we've got Rogue Mail fans out there for sure. Yeah,
I had a friend that had it, and I just remember the song "Crazy Motorcycle."
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I think there was talk about them being the new, I don't know, hottest band around, and it sort of just fizzled out.
Yo, there was a big push for them at one point. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dwayne over at the Lazarus channel, he's a big Rogue Mail fan for sure.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I just want to get this out of the way because this is kind of cheating. I was telling the guy I struggled to get, I think, a good solid part here, and I realized that this band is considered to be new wave of British heavy metal, but I never considered them as such. And you want to start talking about thrash and other heavier musics coming to not only the world but to England. You can't discredit Venom. These 3 Venom records, I pulled them just for, I guess, context, for the fact that I still don't consider these guys new wave of British heavy metal. Yeah, they came out during that time, but they're too punky. There's too much punk in this early stuff in particular. The satanic thing. I mean, I know that was, some new wave of British heavy. I'm so uneducated in that department as well, but they just didn't fit the sound to me. Yeah, they were on a couple of comps. They always seemed like the outlier in that whole scene. Like, oh, well, these guys are doing this shit right now, and this is what's going on. So they must be new wave of British heavy metal. But here you go. This is the Venom. The first 3 Venom records are very well. By the time they get here, they're starting to Metallica. They're touring with Metallica. The writing's on the wall for Venom being the heaviest, most extreme band ever. But these early albums are very influential to the thrash scene. bands like Metallica looked up to this stuff. So
Mhm.
this is very much out of all the new wave of British heavy metal bands, excluding Maiden, excluding Priest, Venom is the one that touched the underground, I think, a bit more, and they actually put out full records other than singles. So they're the ones out of all of them that got the foothold, whether it's due to their punky thing or due to their extremity, their tongue-in-cheek Satanism. I don't know what it was. They appealed to the time and people saluted. I mean, Venom. Let's talk about Venom in English metal culture. How important?
Sure. Kristian, you want to tackle this first?
You mean tackle Venom?
Yeah.
I could just agree with Marty. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a new wave of British heavy metal band, but probably because they happened to release stuff during that time frame, they weren't really sound-wise a part of the scene in that way, because they sounded completely different. And probably the most influential metal band of all times, I think.
Do you think it was because of their different sound is why they endured, where a lot of these other new wave of British heavy metal bands didn't?
Well, since the scene got more extreme after the new wave of British heavy metal, and Venom was the most extreme band, yes, I think that played a big part of it.
Yeah.
Mostly also because all of the thrash and death metal bands that emerged hailed Venom as their main inspiration.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Like you said, Mari, they're the outlier. They don't fit any of the normal parameters for the other bands on the scene at that time.
No.
And yeah, as Kristian said, they're the most extreme act of the time, which means that they are there as the godfathers of all the extreme stuff that comes down the pipe later. I think one other thing that may have helped Venom get the attention, you're exactly right. The satanic thing, just being as outrageous as possible with the lyrics.
Yeah,
that will get the attention of teenagers every single time.
Oh yeah.
But they also, Venom never had a great reputation for being a killer live act, but they did put on very big, loud, flashy shows. And that's something else that set them apart from a lot of their colleagues. A lot of the new wave of British heavy metal stuff, it was, 4 average looking Joes, just, denim, maybe a little bit of leather, playing to, 30 punters in a pub. But, with Venom, it was, big explosions. How much can we pack into these pyrotechnics? We may sound like crap, but we're going to overwhelm your senses to the point that you're going to come out thinking that was fucking awesome.
Yeah, if your drummer can't keep time, blow shit up. But people tend to focus on the flash, the shock and awe, other than the wow, that guy sounds he's falling down the stairs rhythmically.
Yeah, and I think just beyond the typical human reaction of like ooh, big shiny thing, I should look at it. It's something else. I think Tucker makes this point in his books too. England in the early and even into the mid 80s, it's not a glamorous place to be. They went through
rough.
They had a lot of economic downturn in the early Thatcher years, massive levels of unemployment, strikes,
garbage strike. The place was literally suffocating in garbage.
There's a coal miners strike. There's all kinds of issues. I think there are some issues with riots in certain areas at times. I don't know the full history of that, but and to his Tucker's point, like it's, if you ever wondered why so many of these younger bands were singing about all these kind of in a way, there's silly songs. Looking back, a lot of people feel like new wave British heavy metal is like, oh, it's all about chicks and cars and metal living forever. It's like, but it was escapism for these kids that when they weren't playing shows, they were basically standing in the unemployment line, waiting for they're on the dole. There's nothing. The future's very bleak. The present is very boring and restricted, and there's just no opportunities. And this, was escapism for them. And so for, Venom to really lean into that, with, all the mysterious names, we don't know them. It's not Conrad, it's, Kronos. It's not Jeff, it's Mantis.
Mm-hmm.
And, these over the images, that are just, completely like, out of a horror film and stuff. People latched onto that because they were desperate for, that kind of escape from reality. Tucker makes the point that's also probably part of the reason the American bands started to become popular, because to them it's like, here are these bands coming from, sunny California to dreary old gray rainy London, and they've got the crazy hair and all these stories about all these incredibly hot women and groupies and stuff, and it seemed exciting to them. We think about it now, it's like, Rat and Motley Crue is exciting. It doesn't really connect with a lot of
Rat's pretty cool. I like
metal
Rat.
fans today, but
Have your rogue mail. I have Rat.
but he postulates that's part of the reason that American wave of metal coming to the UK did relatively well, because they're just like, oh wow, here's what it's supposed to be like. There's a country where everything's sunny and bright, and they're all driving around in convertibles, and everything is beautiful, and wow, wouldn't it be cool to be there? We can kind of reach out and touch a little bit of that by going to the Twisted Sister concert in London, or catching Motley Crue opening for Iron Maiden in Europe and stuff like that. So yeah, Venom makes sense. It's a weird outlier, and it is a hard one to fit in with new wave of British heavy metal. Motorhead's kind of the same way, maybe to a lesser extent, but some of the same things there, but maybe with fewer fireworks.
Fewer fireworks, but they had the bomber that would come out of the ceiling, and it's another one of those bands that appealed to punks and metalheads. They walked that line, and they're like
sound.
They're dirty street urchin. They had that dirty sound that appealed to both sides, and I think that's a testament to their longevity.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. All right. Well,
there's actually one thing that I've just thought of.
Please.
When did cable TV start?
In the US?
I was a kid in the early 80s, and I think cable TV appeared around 83, 84 maybe.
Long before I could get it. I grew up in the woods, so.
Let's see. My family got it unusually early, especially for our kind of rural area, and I want to say we got it around 82. But again, we were like one of the only, we probably were like the first family on the block to have it, and it stayed that way for a while. So like it was maybe around by 81, but it wasn't common even in 82 or 83.
My point is that once cable TV started, the world got bigger for a lot of people, and almost all of the shows on cable TV that we got here in Sweden were American, not British. So the people who were young in 85, 86, they were mainly influenced by American TV shows, American culture. So I know I've been silent here a while listening to your excellent points, but it just occurred to me that perhaps this is one of the parts of why England or UK sort of faded, because they failed to appear in the cable market. So the people of Europe became more and more Americanized, I suppose. And when you watch American shows and listen to American bands, of course, you're going to accept the whole concept. And the Brits weren't as hot anymore. I'm not sure if it's the main reason, but it could be one of the reasons that the UK scene faded in the mid to late 80s, because they weren't given the same exposure to people outside of the UK.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I didn't know that about the cable in other countries being so American centric. That's interesting, and it would definitely contribute. You're right, because if that's what you're seeing and hearing as a kid, that's what you're going to gravitate towards. Yeah.
And really, since we grew up not being able to have cable, my dad scrimped and saved and got one of those giant 12-foot satellite dishes. And I've talked about this on the channel a bunch, but it was only then that I ever seen or heard of Canada's Much Music. And that had the Pepsi Power Hour, which then afforded me to see Sacrifice videos, Razor, Evil Invaders video, Voivod, Exciter videos. I'm like, wow, it like opened up a whole nother. I'd heard some of those bands going forward, but actually to see them from a video channel from their own country, that wasn't available on American cable. That was something you had to shoot a beam up to the heavens to get. So yeah, I can see in Europe, especially the rise of cable TV, and which is crazy because Britain, the BBC, they had some very weird humor and awesome television at times. So it's weird. Anyway, interesting. That's a good point.
Yeah, really.
And
good.
it may not be true, but it's just something that I thought of.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Perhaps a bit of the puzzle, maybe.
Yeah, 100%.
Definitely. Very cool. All right. Well, shall we start going through the rounds and showing some different albums from this? Yeah, and we didn't, to be clear for the audience too, and just a reminder, this is a pre-recorded episode. If you've come in late and you're wondering why we're not putting comments up on screen, yeah, we've pre-recorded this with Kristian because he's kind enough to join us from Sweden. But yeah, the other point was, we're starting kind of in 1985. We didn't put an absolute end date on this. I think a lot of the stuff we'll talk about will be late 80s, maybe into early 90s, but we may throw in a few more recent things too. We didn't have an absolute end date for when we wanted to cut off the UK metal scene, because obviously the UK commits a lot of, very important things to heavy metal through the 90s and, even in the 2000s. But yeah, we're starting in 85 without a true cutoff date. But yeah, with that disclaimer out of the way, Kristian, what's the first record you would like to highlight?
Okay. This is kind of like being a kid at Christmas. You have this huge pile of gifts, and you don't really know which one to open first. But I think I'm going to start with this one. This is a band called Blood Money. I could have picked either this one or their second album. They're equally great. This is actually a really good album. This is a good example of, this is on Ebony Records, 1986. It's one of the last Ebony releases. I think their second album is the last Ebony release, and it kind of shows that Ebony tried really hard to branch out. This is a speed metal group or a thrash metal group, sort of speed thrash metal, and they tried it and it didn't really work, as we've already discussed. And to me, it's kind of strange because I think it's a killer album, both this one and the second one. It's got this really raw guitar sound. It's not like Agent Steel type speed metal with insane vocals. The vocalist is actually quite accomplished and sings very well in a good clean style. But the guitar sound is really something else. I know some people like to sort of, they don't like the production on several Ebony releases, but I don't mind. It sounds murky, it sounds hollow, it sounds bass heavy. The guitar sound is awesome. And I think this one, I'm going to show it again, just why not? It's re-released quite just a few years ago. I think there was a CD or two CD out on Svart Records. It's a Finnish label.
Yep. They do a great job on their reissues too. They really do a nice job.
Okay, yeah. And it contains all of their material. And this is one of those bands that I think, why the hell haven't they reunited and are destroying Europe? I mean, there's a huge demand for this. I remember when I picked this up, like in the mid 2000s, it was dirt cheap. I think I paid £12 for this, and now it's on everybody's want list, it seems. Yep. So there's actually a decent amount of demand for this type of music. So, hey guys, get the band back together. Get out there, start playing. Get on with it. This is the first one that I want to show. It's a good example of sort of mid-era British trying to evolve the new wave of British heavy metal scene. I mean, they were quite influenced by Savage. I think the Loose and Lethal album, you can hear quite a lot of the guitar riffs and so on this one, but they just sort of turned it up a notch and played faster, played thrashier. Great stuff, guys. That's my first.
That's a really good one to start with too. I think, it highlights some things. Like you said, they're building on the new wave of British heavy metal sound, but making it faster and heavier. And they kind of have to, maybe they get overlooked because they have to fight against the stigma, because so many of their bands around that time were going the other direction, and they were kind of watering down their sound and diluting it. Whereas Blood Money was going in the right direction. I think that's an album more people would like if they did check it out, but maybe it does just get lumped in with like, oh, it's too late to be new wave of British heavy metal, and so it's probably bad. But no, it's a really good example to kick things off with.
All right, Alan, you're up.
All right. Well, some of the ones I'm going to talk about are. It's not like every new wave of British heavy metal band just packed away their instruments and went back to work in the shipyards or something on
I
January 1st.
thought you said they were going on the dole if they weren't playing.
Yeah, it's not like, okay, strike's over, go back to work, or show's over, no more concerts for you. Some of the bands did stay active for a while, and some of them still put out pretty good records. Not all of them became kind of indebted to the American sound and scene of trying to make something more commercial or more friendly. Not all of them fell prey to the enchantment of pyromania. Some of them still did good heavy metal records that just didn't get any traction. Good example of this was Angel Witch. The Angel Witch self-titled came out in 1980 and was a cornerstone of the new wave of British heavy metal, kind of a legendary release by a legendary band. But it took them 5 years to get the second album out. And again, for a music scene in the early 80s, waiting 5 years, you might as well have waited 20 years. The whole landscape's different.
People forget about you.
They completely forget about you. And I mean, Angel Witch, there were some singles, some EPs. Part of it was lineup instability and things like that. They just couldn't quite, get a lineup together long enough to get another album. But again, labels were changing interests and stuff, so they had to deal with that. But yeah, in 1985, you finally got the second Angel Witch album called Screamin' and Bleedin'. There's a lot of apostrophes there for whatever reason. Cover, it's kind of, all right, generic looking. Boobs.
Something about it I like.
Boobs sell heavy metal records, right?
Yeah.
This, was on Kilowatt. Kilowatt was a label where a lot of these bands landed on around this time. So you have some decent stuff on the Kilowatt catalog, but it seems like they were a label that maybe just didn't have a lot of distribution or a lot of sway with the music press, because I don't think a lot of these got advertised or distributed really well. And it's very easy, for a lot of folks to think, oh yeah, okay, that's some later Angel Witch lineup that's not going to be as good. Is a different lineup. Is it as good as the debut album? No, it does live in the shadow of that. But this one still has a lot of really good tracks on it. The production is not great. I'll circle back to that in a minute. But yeah, you've got a lot of good tunes on here. Starts with, Who's to Blame is a good one. Child of the Night is good. Evil Games is a really cool one. Afraid of the Dark is good. The title track is really kind of raw, almost getting a little thrashy. Side 2, Waltz the Night's one of my favorite songs from this period. Goodbye is pretty good. Fatal Kiss is another very heavy, a little bit epic sounding. So, I mean, the band had a good sound at this time. They were writing good songs, but they weren't getting any attention. And to go back to the production, I think it is something that hamstrung a lot of the bands around this time. Kristian, you mentioned that, a lot of people weren't keen on what Ebony Productions was doing. There's always been that joke that if you've heard one Ebony album, you've heard them all, because they kind of just use the exact same production for all of them. And it just seems like, a lot of the labels, when they would pick up bands like, Blood Money or Angel Witch, they just always started out on the wrong foot by wanting to be cheap out on the production, sometimes cheap out on the art and stuff. So the bands were there. They were making some good stuff, but it was difficult to find. And when you got it, it didn't sound good. It didn't have a big, full production sound to it, which definitely would have turned off some people from continuing to check those bands out.
I will comment on the production, the cheaping out on the production stuff.
Sure.
Think about back in the 80s, you get a lot of like the grindcore bands that go into these studios. They're actual proper studios that don't know what to do with this music, but there's still proper studios that you have to pay. You're not getting an underground rate. I mean, a lot of these guys will go and play it, record their shit at night when no one else is booked. Mm-hmm. There are ways to cut corners, I think, but you're still going into a studio, which I'm sure, I mean, they're not cheap now. I can't imagine they weren't. It was even worse back then. You know, it almost seemed like the big labels pumped all the money into these studios without batting an eye. But when you get a smaller metal label starting out, that production budget is tough, man. It's tough to just pull that money out of your ass. So I don't know. And then that's why a lot of the records sounded like they did, because here's, you know, a fast, heavy band in a studio that's only done rock and pop, or, you know, whatever the hell's happening in 1980. You know, they don't know how to manage faster music.
Yep.
It's like a foreign, like these kids are coming from a different planet with something completely different. I'm thinking more along the lines of like grindcore or death metal, or like in Germany, thrash. You know, it wasn't until Noise secured Harris Johns, who had a good ear for, you know, capturing that sound, the German thrash sound. But anyway, I'm on a tangent here. Sorry, guys. But
no, it's a good point, because yeah, money doesn't grow on trees, and it was a tough economic times in the UK around that time. So, but you get caught in a cycle then. You know, if the label only invests a little bit and you get a shitty sounding product, and then nobody buys the product, and it's like, well, then we're not going to let you release any more product. But it's like, well, the problem was you kind of set yourself up for failure, you know, to some extent. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, nobody bought it because you didn't advertise it, and it didn't sound good and didn't look good. So why would people buy it then? But yeah, at the same time, it's like, well, if you want, you know, us to give you a bigger budget, you've got to go out and make it happen. But we can't go out and make it happen if we don't have a good product. So.
Wait, this isn't Pyromania.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, this isn't Iron Maiden. It's, you know, somewhere, again, you're competing with stuff like, you know, Somewhere in Time, you know, by you know, this phase. And you're going to put out, you know, an album with, you know, 3 apostrophes. You couldn't even afford all the G's, you know, in the typeset.
Those boobs don't airbrush themselves. You got to pay the artist too.
Indeed. But yeah,
did the Screaming and Bleeding album fail commercially at the time? I don't really remember.
It
must have been hard to sort of follow up on the first Angel Witch album, which is, of course, a classic.
Yes. And you're right. Very hard album to follow up on, Kristian. And yes, you know, again, of course, you know, I'm too young to have been on that scene, but accounts say that, yeah, that album did not go over well. It got over. I don't know if it got, you know, panned in reviews and stuff, but it just got no attention, if nothing else. People either didn't like it or never even checked it out. All right, Marty. So that was my first one. What would you like to start? What's at the top of your pile?
Well, this is another probably cheat, but I think this is a band that is very influential for several styles of music, but highlights the punk aesthetic that is eventually going to creep into British metal for me. But the debut full length from Amoebix called Arise. This, I think, often considered as a crust punk record, but there's a lot of weight and distortion in these songs and metal type riffing. So, I mean, called an early crossover record, but the Baron is never hidden the fact that Venom and Manowar were 2 of his favorite bands like that, Merciful Fate. He was very influenced by that stuff. And that would creep into what Amoebix was doing, yet, you know, more politically charged lyrics, more of a punk aesthetic. But yeah, I think this is a band that kind of had their stamp put on the English sound early on, that we're going to hear in numerous albums I'm going to show here later tonight, I think. So I figured, like Venom, this came out in 85 as well. Venom came out in 81. This came out in 85. And some of the thrash records I'm going to show are very much kissed by the aesthetics of punk. So there's a trajectory I have planned here, even though I don't have a ton of records to show. I tried to set it that way. So yeah, Amoebix is my first pull for the night.
Oh, good example. And yeah, that's one that does appeal to multiple different kind of fan bases.
Yeah. All right, Kristian, you are back. Number 2.
Okay, let's see. Since we're talking about Venom before. I think I need to get this one off my chest. This is Deliverance with
Mhm.
Devil's Meat, and I think this was released in 1987. And it's impossible to talk about this band without mentioning Venom, so I'll mention Venom again. I always found it kind of strange that since Venom was so influential, perhaps the most influential metal band of all time, that there were comparatively few British bands who played music in the same style as Venom did. I mean, once Metallica started playing thrash metal, there were suddenly hundreds of bands trying to sound exactly like Metallica. But how many bands were trying to sound like Venom in 1983, 1984? None. Um, except perhaps those guys. But a few years later, it's a chaotic, noisy, almost industrial sound. At least I think on the last track, it's kind of hard to see, but the last track called 21 Steps to Hell, which sounds like a Venom song.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is on the Metalworks label, so it's also a small label. Perhaps they
Mhm.
couldn't really kick off and advertise as much as they should have. But to me, it's really strange that since Venom became so influential, how come nobody liked these guys?
Never even
sound-
heard of them. Never heard
No.
of them. Yeah.
Mhm.
And this also, there's a sticker on here. I'm trying to show it. Perhaps you can see that if you get this, you get a free cassette compilation.
Ah,
So obviously it didn't sell really well. So they tried to,
incentivize it. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
ask at the counter. I haven't heard the cassette, so I can't really mention on it. It also came with a poster. So I mean, it got everything going for it. But yeah, is it a great metal album? Probably not. But is it a unique sounding, quirky, kind of weird album that sort of demands some form of interest because of its quirky? Yes. And since Venom is such an influential band and we're talking about the British scene, it sort of puts the finger on why weren't there more bands like this? How come?
Yeah.
And I think we've discussed it a bit already, but I wanted to include them because I wanted to raise that issue, and I think we've talked about it already, so I won't be
Mhm.
going on too long about it. But yeah, interesting album. They have a second album as well that's more, I don't know, polished, but more boring as well.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point, Kristian, because I think it's one of the things that makes Venom seem like such an anomaly. Nobody else at the time did the same thing. And there was, like you said, there's a real time lag before anybody even tries. Whereas, yeah, like, and like Marty was doing the math earlier, something comes out, makes a big impact. You expect maybe like, within about 2 years after the fact, you expect to start seeing, the copycats show up. Maybe well-intentioned copycats. I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but you expect folk like to hear Welcome to Hell in 1980, and by 82, you should have more bands locally trying to go in that direction, especially because Venom was successful.
Yeah.
It's
And I
not like
mean, just
Venom
look
was
at
underground.
Bathory, for example, who picked up the Venom sound very early on and became famous in the mid 80s for it.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
come nobody else did?
Yeah, and no other band in that new wave of British heavy metal period really does. There are a few very obscure exceptions. Some bands that did go for a gruffer, heavier sound.
Bulldozer's
thinking-
another Venom-esque band. It's Italy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I just didn't mean to interrupt you, Alan. That
No,
just popped into my head.
Bulldozer's a good example. Yeah, I was just trying to think of other ones on the British scene. I mean, I've got to go down to like something like Robespierre, who
Yeah.
that's a cool release.
They
but
only had
it
a
wasn't
cassette out,
released.
right?
Yeah, it wasn't even released at the time on vinyl and stuff. So it's a good question. I don't know why was Venom just that far ahead of their time that it took 4
Might be.
years for a band from Sweden to finally catch up to them.
All right, Alan, you're up.
All right. I don't have a lot of British thrash ones to show, but I'll mention this one. I think Marty's got those bases covered much better than I do. But this is one I've liked from the scene. And it's one that, again, shows off that kind of, punky influence that Marty has mentioned. So when they had UK thrash bands, they did tend to lean into that direction. I've got this as part of a box set, so I just got to hold up the inset. The band is Virus, and the album, it's their debut, is this one called Pray for War, which is an 85 release, if I remember right. Cool, sort of, black and white cover. It's a little reminiscent of like, the first Bolt Thrower album artwork. And parts of it are going for kind of the same aesthetic. The album very much has this there's a little bit of a theme to the album where it's man versus machine, this kind of, post-apocalyptic Terminator landscape of a world, little Voivodian maybe with, these, giant, mechanical killing machines ravaging the landscape. But yeah, the music's, very infused, with, that kind of, more hardcore punk aesthetic in it. It's quite good. I like the album. It's a fun listen. As Kristian said, with Deliverance, is it the greatest metal album ever made? No, it has its shortcomings, but it's a really good, fun listen nevertheless. And it kind of fits into what could have been or should have been maybe the British, tradition of thrash, focusing more on that. I don't want to say crossover sound, because then it starts comparing it back to American bands. And it's not exactly, this doesn't necessarily sound like a DRI record or something. It's a little different from that. Unfortunately, that wasn't really the long-term tradition. As Marty's mentioned, a lot of the British bands, did go for more of an Americanized sound, a Bay Area sound. And Virus, fell prey to that too. The box set that came out a few years ago has, their first 3 albums. And by the time you're getting to, oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're getting to like albums like, that one with Recon, and the third one, Lunacy. There's a lot more of a Metallica influence on this band.
I got this in a used or not used bin. Camelot had this for $1 in
cool.
one of their bargain bins, and I listened to it. I can probably put it on and sing along with a couple songs, but it never blew me away. I was never very impressed with it. In fact, I pulled it out. I'm like, and since that box set that you're showing came, more people online have been talking about Virus. The British guys have shown that box set or talked about Virus.
Yep.
With some sort of nostalgia, fond of nostalgia about it.
Sure.
But
Makes sense.
It's okay. It's good. It doesn't blow me away though,
Yeah. I mean, you can even kind of, see it in the change, in logos, from the first album, being, a little more crude and, a little spiky looking. And then on the second one, it's a very, slick, sheen, metallic looking kind of logo. And like you said, Marty, these, 2 albums are not bad. Lunacy is pretty decent. If you want to hear a band, trying to follow Metallica's footsteps.
Yep.
They're not doing anything different or original. They're not bad, but yeah, they didn't stick with, that, homegrown style of thrash back on the debut very long. So yeah, again, I want to leave most of the thrash conversation to Marty. He's got that down, but yeah, the Virus one is the debut by Virus, I think, is a cool one that is definitely worth checking out for folks that like that style of thrash.
Wasn't that one on Metalworks as well?
I think it was originally on Metalworks. Yeah. Let me double check that real quick. I've got another tab open here with Metal Archives. I think it was a Metalworks release.
Pray for War was Metalworks. Yep.
Good call, Kristian.
There's a red thread.
Yeah. So I'm continuing on with the punks becoming metalized, and pretty evident if you listen to this album, Onslaught's Power from Hell.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, this is a really good record. In fact, I realized when I pulled this out, I'm like, oh shit, I haven't spun this a while. So I pulled it up online. Unfortunately, that stupid, God, I hate that. But Seam Split. Wazoo Records, $4.50. It's in great shape other than the Seam Split, and it's a gold stamp promo. But anyway, you're getting, there's a lot of reverb on this record, which kind of gives it it makes it feel more like a punk thing, even though the riffs are way more metalized. The vocalist, who is the vocals? There's 2 guys. Nige Rocket, and Paul Mahoney. So there's two guys credited for vocals on here. It's more of a punk yelling style, with more of a gruff punk yelling style. But these songs, you know, you got Angels of Death, Onslaught, Power from Hell, Thermonuclear Devastation of the Planet Earth, Lord of Evil. They're a band that's following in Venom's footsteps and kicking up the playing the evil card here. This is one of the bands in my next round, I'm showing the next one too, because I want to talk about it a little bit more in depth.
Oh, that's fair.
But this is one of the bands that kind of get it right for me early on anyway. They kind of lose me as they go forward. They get Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper singing on the Sanity one.
In Search of Sanity.
In Search of Sanity. Yeah. Never had that record. I only have the Shell Shock EP leading up to it. But anyway, yeah, this is a band that got it right for me, and it's very English sounding, and which is cool. They're determining an English style where it isn't just a band emulating, you know, Metallica or Slayer, which they kind of do on the next album a little bit, but still it's its own thing. But we'll get there here my next turnaround. But yep, Onslaught, Power from Hell, and this is where the metal and punk meet and start to change. Another band that did that a lot that I used to have and I got rid of was Hellbastard. They were very much a kind of a crust punk band and evolved into anyway.
Yeah. So, no, good pick, Marty. And yeah, here's one that you could say had some of that Venom. Now here's a band maybe following in Venom's footsteps, but it's like 4 years after the fact. It took them a long time to follow up on their success. Back to Kristian's point.
All right, Kristian, what you got?
Let's show some CDs, I think, and let's fast forward a few years. This is Holocaust, and if my fingers aren't in the way, it's called The Courage to Be. And this is, I mean, everybody knows about Holocaust, right? I mean, Metallica made them famous, at least, covering some of their early material. It was a new wave of British heavy metal band back in the 80s, but it has morphed into something completely different. Once I think the original singer left and John Mortimer, the guitarist, became the band leader, and he sort of took the band in a completely different direction. So this is more of a progressive thrash album. And I think Holocaust started morphing into this in the early 90s. I mean, they have an impressive back catalog. I think they released 12 albums or so. Most of them has passed below my radar, but this one hasn't. And I'd like to compare them to, this is a really weird mix. It's one part Metallica, one part Voivod, and one part U2. Which is really, really weird.
Yeah.
And I think it's got some post-punk leanings on it. And I actually asked John Mortimer online if he was a fan of U2, and he confirmed that yes, these later era Holocaust albums were actually sort of influenced by U2. And
interesting, cool.
It's a very varied album, quite a few long songs, quite a few shorter ones. One song is very unserious. It's called Spanner Omelette, which is just really weird riffing and a lot of folks singing in a childish way. Then coupled with very serious songs like The Collective, which probably is my favorite Holocaust song of all time, which deals with sort of, Big Brother sort of communist state manifesto in a very serious way. So sort of thinking man's metal along with laughing man's metal at the same time. And a nod to everybody who likes odd type of music. The most of the late era or 2000s and onwards era Holocaust albums are really good, but not in the way that you would suppose they would be good. Strange, but really pleasing to listen to. I don't know really much more. This released on it's from 2000. It's on Edgy Records. I don't think they released a lot more than Holocaust albums, to be honest. So I don't really know much about it. They're still recording, still playing live. I've seen them a few times, always great. Yeah, go check them out if you have the opportunity. It's a good band, and they're not a new wave of British heavy metal band anymore, not by a long shot.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, good pick. Yeah, this was one Kristian and I talked about, over the past week or so, and like, yeah, someone should talk about that, and it should be you, because I haven't ever gotten familiar with their later stuff. I've always wanted to spend more time checking it out, and I just never circled back. But yeah, Voivod is the one band that everyone kind of agrees that they were probably drawing influence from, even by the late 80s, with stuff like The Sound of Souls. That there's a Voivodian influence that comes in. It completely replaces the new wave of British heavy metal sound they had back at the start of the decade.
I think that's dissonant sound that they went for. I mean, there's no other band except Voivod that sounds like that. It's just Voivod. You can hear it immediately. Oh, that must be Voivod.
Yep,
definitely.
So, yeah, a cool one to check out. It's another one that people would probably get into it if they checked out some of that later period Holocaust, but it's always been very low key. It's never gotten a big push. It never had its Metallica moment like the early Holocaust material did.
The album released just before this one, or just after, I can't really remember the order. It's called Covenant, and that's actually, even though it's on CD, it's really hard to find. And I'm perhaps not that expensive because there are not a ton of people looking for it, but I suppose they didn't press many copies. So overlooked from the beginning, perhaps.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Seems like, but yeah, another good one for folks to check out.
All right, Alan, what's up next on your list?
Okay, next up on my list is a really good band that showed up at exactly the wrong time. As we were saying, already in '83, things were getting kind of dicey if you were a new wave of British heavy metal band. Imagine if you release your first demo in '84. Your timing is off. You are now late to the party. But yeah, this band had a demo in '84. They released a single in '85 that's quite good, and they did a self-released album in '86. And the one we're talking about is Elixir. This is a reissue of the debut album, The Son of Odin. Has always been, a favorite among fans who tolerate that later new wave of British heavy metal period. It's albums like this that cause some folks, myself included, to want to kind of push the deadline for new wave of British heavy metal back to the end of '86. I'm like, this fits the genre so well that it feels really weird to leave it out of the conversation just because it came out a little bit later. But yeah, one thing that helped Elixir along, they had an excellent vocalist in Paul Taylor, who's still active and works with some other bands too. Still sounds really, really good as a singer also. But yeah, Son of Odin, it has all the best qualities of like an Iron Maiden. They could do the kind of bigger, epic, gallopy songs. A lot of songs that would have some kind of maybe literary origin. There's a Pandora's Box song on here, for example. So they were kind of very much working in the same headspace that Steve Harris and company would work in. But of course, you're showing up right when the scene is winding down and turning its attention away from this style of stuff. Nevertheless, Son of Odin's always had, a good reputation, kind of a good following. The band has released albums in more recent years too. You can pick these up kind of cheap sometimes when you find the right site and these go on sale. Yeah, you can get them for a really good price on some of the reissues and some of the later material. But yeah, Elixir's a great example of a band. If they could have somehow sped up the process and gotten this album out in like 81 or 82, it probably would always get discussed as like, one of the absolute, benchmarks of new wave of British heavy metal. But coming out in 86, it gets to be one of the cool albums that came out, kind of, after, the buzzer had already sounded and time had expired. It's like still a great album, but yeah, it just came along at the wrong time for them to get a ton of exposure and recognition as they deserved.
to me, I think the Elixir album is actually the one New Wave of British heavy metal album closest to Manowar. I don't know if it's the Odin thing going on, but it always struck me as quite powerful and almost, it's not operatic, but sort of it's big on every front, just like Manowar were. So it's strange, even though it's released it's 85, right? The Elixir album.
And I think it's 86, but yeah.
86, okay, but it's in the middle of the heyday for Manowar. So why didn't they capitalize on that more? Could have been their big break. Who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. They have that same very epic scale that they work on really well.
And I mean, the Son of Odin track could have been on any Manowar album.
You could take that, turn it up to 10, and Manowar could cover that song. Absolutely.
Put on your gloves of metal. Yeah.
Manowars don't do covers.
Other bands play covers. Manowar, something. Yeah. No, that's a good comparison. I had not thought of that before. Yeah. And Manowar is another one of those bands that had become familiar, with that wave of stuff coming in through Music for Nations and stuff. Even the debut Manowar album had a British release. I don't think it was Music for
they were
Nations,
signed. They were signed in Britain.
Okay. Yeah.
That infamous contract signed with their blood.
Because
in Britain.
Yeah, they were. I'm fuzzy on the details here, but because Manowar, I think, was supposed to have one of the headliner slots at like the Reading Festival around '82, and something went wrong. Like the label wouldn't, pay to fly them over or something, and so I think ended up with a Diamond Head got that spot instead. But yeah, therefore, just a little bit there, Manowar could have been one of the headliners at one of the biggest, UK metal festivals right there, when the new wave of British heavy metal was still kind of, going at full speed. So that could have been a very interesting change to all of a sudden, have gangs running around London wearing, fur and, football pads and spikes and stuff if they had caught on. All right, Marty. Which direction are we going next? Are you following up on
yeah, you got to follow up. This to me is an English treasure. I love this. Always love this record. And it's a band that arose with a punk vibe, and they've kind of exercised it from their sound at this point. It's Slayer, Metallica is kind of creeping into this, but Onslaught just had a cleaner presentation, I think. The songs on this record are great, super catchy, great guitar harmonies. It's a good mix of thrash and heavy metal. It really just is a special record. And out of the handful of things I've heard from them beyond this record, it's their best. This is their best. They got a little bit more modern as they've gone on. They're still active. I know singer Cy Keeler, was that his name? I don't remember. Cy something came back. Oh yeah. There it is. Cy Keeler came back into the band. Onslaught now doesn't sound like Onslaught on this record. I don't know. This has always been very special to me, and one of the few instances. I mean, there's been other good thrash albums that come out of England, but this is, to me, one of the top 5. It's just a great record.
Yeah, makes sense.
I wish they would have done another one like it, but instead they, like I said, they got Steve Grimmett. In Search of Sanity is more. They went a little bit more heavy metal on that one, if memory serves, didn't they?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's more heavy metal. It still has a good thrash component, but it starts to sound. There's more and more of that Metallica, thrash creeping. It's got all the palm muted kind of riffs and stuff. I like In Search of Sanity. The songs are too long. It really does feel like they wanted to do something like Master of Puppets, but they weren't quite ready for it yet. They needed to do something more like Ride the Lightning instead. Because the songs are good, but they all need to be trimmed by 1 or 2 minutes. They don't quite have enough chops to fill out those 6 and 7 minute songs. Grimmett's cool singing on it.
He's a good singer.
Obviously.
He's a good singer, but not in Onslaught.
Yeah,
it's a weird fit compared to the first 2 albums.
I remember I was so disappointed with In Search of Sanity having the two first albums that I actually sold it because I thought this it's not the right sound, it's not the same band.
Mhm.
And now thinking back, it was kind of a stupid move because it's still a decent album, but I wanted it to sound so much like the other two Onslaught albums, and when it didn't,
Yep.
I couldn't really stomach it, so I got rid of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
It's in a weird place. I understand. I got rid of my copy too because it's like if I want to hear Steve Grimmett, I'm going to play a Grim Reaper album, and if I
or
want
the
to hear
first Chateau
Onslaught,
album.
or or the first Chateau album. Yep, good call.
I'm rooting for that one.
Yep. But and if I want to hear an Onslaught album, I'm going to play one of the first two. So I never played In Search of Sanity after a while because it didn't quite fit either camp.
Speaking of In Search of Sanity, the band has re-recorded the album with I don't know who's singing now. It might be Cy
Oh,
Keeler.
really?
I have no idea. It's coming out soon. I thought we got a promo for it, but we didn't. We got the demo. The
Is that
demo
the thing that's
collection.
coming out at the end of May? The Origins of Aggression.
That is the
have-
demo thing, but there's
Okay.
they've re-recorded and re-envisioned In Search of Sanity. So I
Cool.
saw that online and like, oh cool, maybe we'll do something with that. And I couldn't find the promo, so apparently we didn't get it.
I see it released as a single, but there's a single release for In Search of Insanity 2025, which I'm guessing may have been like a Bandcamp release or something.
Maybe it's just a song. Like I said,
Maybe they just did the one.
let me look and see here.
There is an album set for May 23rd, which is in the future for us. It may be in the past by the time this episode's on YouTube, but it's called Origins of Aggression. But maybe you said it's maybe just a demo collection.
That's the way it looked to me. I don't know.
Let's see.
It is
Disc
because
one contains re-recordings of songs from the
Angel
82
of
to 91
Death,
period.
Thermonuclear Devastation of Planet Earth. Yeah, this is all
Okay.
redos. It looks
So
like
old material. Okay.
And then disc
Still
2
cool
is
to
all
have it coming out.
covers.
Yep. Still, looks like a cool collection.
Yeah, they're cool. It's cool. They're still, a band, a thrash band from England that just doesn't know it's still kicking an ass.
Yep.
So
it feels like the band just never could quite settle on a style though, because those first three albums are all a little. It's like they kept trying to reinvent themselves, and so I wonder if that kind of hurt them in terms of getting traction with the fan base.
That could be
because even the first two albums, have they're closer to one another than they are to Search Insanity, but they're still different.
Then they split up for a while
it doesn't
too.
have that punk sound.
Yeah, they split up for a while too between In Search of Sanity and the.
Oh yeah,
I think they did anyway.
Yeah, no, there's a pretty big gap. Let's see, 86 was the Force, 89 was
89 to 2007. So yeah, there's a gap.
Yeah, there's about 18 years there before they got back together.
Mm-hmm. But all right, Kristian, you're back. We've pontificated long enough on Onslaught.
Don't worry, we could talk about Onslaught all day if we talk about the two first albums.
Right.
Now we're going to talk about this one. This is a strange one, I suppose. This is Sacrilege Beyond the Realms of Madness.
It's a great album, great band.
And it's style-wise all over the place. I mean, it's got thrashy elements, it's got doom elements, it's got heavy metal elements, it's got crust punk elements, it's got hardcore elements. Everything you can think of packed into a fairly short album. I think it's like half an hour long, perhaps, and all of the songs are quite long. So I think there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 songs in total. So quite impressive. I think it was released in a multitude of different labels. This one is on the Children of the Revolution records. It's the British first release. I think it was released in the US quite early.
Relapse. I have the Relapse pressing of it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this one is it's kind of funny. It says here, don't pay more than $2.99. I can tell you need to pay a lot more than $2.99 if you want to get a copy nowadays. But to me, it's important also because it's a girl singing or a woman singing.
Tam.
And perhaps she's the reason it's labeled as hardcore, because her vocal style is very hardcore-ish, and I'll be damned if it doesn't work really well with both the thrash and the doom elements. And I don't think I've seen any other band try it that way to mix those kind of different sounds together, and it really works
Mhm.
really well. And all of the songs are absolutely great. So it's a fun one to listen to, and it's very varied. I mean, due to the different genres. Um, I think more on their later releases, they became more of a straight doom metal band with some influences, but more perhaps focused towards the heavy metal doom metal side of things. And I think that was kind of sad, really. I hope they could have continued in that
Well,
vein because it's
if I
so
could
unique.
jump in for just a second, Kristian,
Sure.
because I pulled their second one, Within the Prophecy,
Yes.
and there's Tam there, and Shane Embury's brother, it looks like. But yeah, this album to me, it's more mid-paced. It still has a punk vibe, but they're trying to be more metal. They're
Yeah.
making more epic songs. And if you listen to this and you mix a little of this, Discharge, Hear Nothing, See Nothing, Say Nothing with it, you have this, Bolt Thrower.
Yep.
In Battle There Is No Law. And it's funny because I got this tape when it came out back in the day because it was on Metal Blade, and I bought everything that was on Metal Blade. But I was always struggled to get into it until like the last 5 or 10 years. I got a copy of this record and threw it on. I was utterly shocked at how much it sounded like Bolt Thrower. You could tell Bolt Thrower. In fact, they were friends with Bolt Thrower. You know, Carl has talked about how they would hang out with Tam, and you know, they were all crust punk kids. You know, they all this whole era of the scene was founded in crust punks, and it's just funny listening back to this how much mid-paced Bolt Thrower you hear in it. It's really, really crazy, and that makes this a very influential band. At the time, you don't really think about it. It isn't until their third album, Turn Back Trilobite, that is where the wheels fall off. And some people say they love it. It's really strange. It's almost, she's singing almost kind of like a narration style, and the music is just weird. It's just not.
Yeah, she didn't really adapt well to.
She didn't adapt to the times.
No.
Yeah.
Ship changing, but
one of the issues that I wanted to address here is that it's interesting that there were so few women playing metal from Britain. I mean, they had Girl School as a big influence.
Yeah.
How come there weren't more girls starting bands? I don't know.
It's common in the punk scene, but it isn't in the metal. It's now, it is, not. But then it wasn't.
But it wasn't back then.
Yeah.
There is one. We shouldn't. If I show the album, this YouTube video will get pulled from YouTube. But there's a sexploitation British band called Oral. Consists of all girls, but I'm not really sure that they actually had anything to do with the album. I think it was just a front for someone else.
Yeah.
You know, like all of those strange American bands who all of the band members weren't real persons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That album's always had the reputation. Like, yeah, you here, just let's take a picture of some, attractive females in very little clothing, and somebody else can handle the music part.
Yeah.
Well, there was also a band from England called Rock Goddess. It was three women. It was a power trio. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
know if it's
in
the same era as Girl School, I think.
Yeah.
Early 80s, but after that, almost none. There were Tam, of course, and then there was, my death metal knowledge is so rusty, but the Bolt Thrower had a
Joe
female
Bench.
Joe
bassist,
Bench.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I can't think of anybody.
There weren't many. Nope, definitely not. And yeah, Rock Goddess were kind of contemporary with Girl School. Some folks love Rock Goddess. Like King Fowley is nuts about Rock Goddess. I never heard it. I just didn't. It didn't click with me for some reason.
Is that the same Rock Goddess that would get mostly naked on stage? Is that the same?
No, that's Rock Bitch.
Oh, Rock Bitch. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they were from the US, but I'm not sure. It's not really my kind of thing.
Yeah. All right, Alan, I jumped in front of you, so go for it.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yep. Well, following up on Kristian's point, I can think of one other band from around this time that did have a female member from the British scene, so I'll jump to that one. It was a band called War Machine. They made this one album on Neat Records. It's a pretty late one in Neat's catalog. Pretty sure this is from '86. The album's called Unknown Soldier. Pretty easy cover to spot with the very, very orange kind of color scheme. But yeah, the vocalist here is a lady named Bernadette Mooney and has a very good voice. The style is straightforward heavy metal. It leans again towards something that's a little more fantastic, a little bigger kind of epic song structures. Her voice is perfect for it because she's got a little bit of kind of a wailing in control, not shrieky or anything, but kind of a wailing higher voice, that has the right kind of combination. Feels a little bit sad, a little bit wistful, but can also sound powerful when delivered right. And so yeah, and it's a pretty unique sound. There's not a lot of other bands that did something like War Machine that popped to mind right away. It's just one of the obscure ones from late in the Neat catalog, so not a lot of people checked it out. Again, wasn't heavy enough to appeal to the folks that were already starting to attend Napalm Death concerts and stuff like that by '86. It's not a thrash release in any way, shape, or form. It's got, again, kind of a typical Neat low recording budget to it. And it's late enough in the catalog that it doesn't really interest new wave of British heavy metal collectors a whole lot. But I've always thought it was a very cool album. If there's one downside to it, the songs are pretty similar to each other. There's not a lot of variation on the album. This was one years and years ago. I made a cassette copy of this, and I sent it to Jeff Wagner with some other stuff. I think we were trading records maybe. And so I just, threw in, here's some other stuff. I had a copy of on cassette or something. And when we were talking about it, like after the fact, he mentioned, he's like, I put that War Machine. He's like, I played the first song. He's like, that was really cool. It was amazing. I love the sound of it. It's like, but then they made just 9 more songs that sounded exactly the same as that. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty apt to just summary of War Machine. There's some other demo material and stuff that War Machine did, but yeah, to my knowledge, there was no other follow-ups. But yeah, there's a footnote in history because they were one of the only other bands that did have a female member at the time, and they did come up with kind of a cool album with a relatively unique sound to it. It's one I used to play a ton. Don't break it out nearly as much anymore, but yeah, still a good listen and kind of an obscure one for folks to dig up. Not an expensive album to this day. It's just an overlooked one. You can pick up pretty cheap if it sounds interesting to you.
Can I just comment on the cover?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's one great looking cover.
It's a kind of a cool design. Nothing too, it's not, a Dan Seagrave painting or anything. But yeah, I liked the weird color scheme for it. It makes it stand out.
It makes it stand out, really. Yeah.
Yep.
It's one of those albums that I could pick up just because I saw the cover and I thought, wow, this must be great.
Yep. Yeah, and the reason I stumbled into this one of the old vinyl dealers who used to put out a mail-order catalog in the mid and late 90s, he would always have like a short 2 or 3 sentence description of each album, and most of the time it would be something like Ebony Records release, sounds like Grim Reaper kind of thing. But for this one, he had like, a much longer blurb and just really kind of went off. So, really cool, unique sounding, late new wave of British heavy metal band with an awesome female vocalist. And so it was very much a case of, the advertising got me. I'm like, that sounds very cool. And it was like $12 or something. So it's like, okay, I'll squeeze another $12 out of my piggy bank and add that, next time I order something from him. But yeah, otherwise, I don't know if I would have heard of that band to this day because nobody ever brings them up. All right, Marty.
Actually, I already went, so it's Kristian's turn again. Yep.
Okay. It's CD time again, I think. I would have liked to show the vinyl of this, but I don't have this on vinyl. because this one is really, really hard to find, and it's really, really expensive, and it's absolutely fucking great.
Yeah.
This is Slander, Careless Talk Costs Lives from 1991, which is a very weird year to release an album sounding like this. This sounds like it was recorded in, I guess, 1983 or something.
Mhm.
So the releasing this on a private label in 1991 isn't going to get you anywhere, unfortunately.
No, not at all.
This was the entirely wrong era for this album to come out, and it's a shame because it's a gem. It's an overlooked gem. This is the re-release on Stormspell Records. I don't remember which year it came out.
It's been a while. He did that at least
2015,
Good old
perhaps.
Storm Spell Records. I mean, does he put out banger hits all the time? No, but man, it's a dedicated label.
Yeah, it's a dedicated
Yeah.
label, and this one is a limited edition out of 1,000 copies, and it's a 2 CD. It's the old one and all of the songs re-recorded again, and yeah, a great band. I actually have a quite funny story because the band has reunited and are playing again. They released an album in 2017, which is maybe not as good, but still a very decent album. And they played at a metal festival in Europe that I went to a few years ago. I think it was in 2023, and we were sitting in the parking lot on the campsite in our camping chairs, drinking beer, and I was telling the rest of the camp, "Well, sorry guys, I need to go. I'm going inside to see Slander." And everybody was like, "Oh, why do you want to see that? It's a boring hard rock AOR band." No, that's Slander from Netherlands. This is Slander from the UK. It's a British metal band. Oh, well, okay. Everybody was very uninterested, and I told them because somebody had this big stereo hooked up to sort of Spotify or something, and I told him, "Hey, why don't you play Cry of the Wolf on the stereo?" Okay. And he started Cry of the Wolf, and I leaned back in my chair and I opened a beer and I watched everybody's jaw drop to the floor once the song started. And everybody was like, "Hey man, this is great stuff. Why haven't I heard this before?" Yeah. Did they join me at the show? No, they didn't. So I had to go there myself anyway. And they, of course, played Cry of the Wolf as the last song, and it was really good. And that kind of shows how overlooked these type of bands are. Even when you play their music and it's really good, well, people have other things to do, perhaps drinking beer in a parking lot. But yeah, it's kind of a funny story. But it's one of the great early 90s standard heavy metal albums from the UK.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So I had to bring this up.
Oh yeah, it was one of the first things that was like on the must cover list for sure. And you're right. I mean, I mentioned before, like the Elixir album is 2 years too late. The Slander album is
Slander's 10 years too late.
Yeah.
It's literally 10 years out of time.
Yeah.
That album makes no sense in 1991. It's like, again, going back to the whole Terminator thing. Someone went back in time, yanked it out of 1981 and moved it 10 years into the future for no discernible reason whatsoever.
So it might be like the first new wave of traditional heavy metal band right there.
Actually, there could be something to that.
Yeah.
Because that album started, I mean, I didn't hear about that album in 91 for sure. When I did start, hearing more about it and more people seemed to be picking up on it was right there around the turn of the century, like 2000, 2001, 2002, when you're kind of setting the stage for the new wave of traditional heavy metal stuff to start to become a thing. That's actually a really good observation, Marty. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it because it's not even close. It didn't get released close to that time, but it was around that time when that album got on people's radar somehow. Yeah.
And when I heard it, I can't remember really how long ago, perhaps 2006, 2007. And already back then, an original copy was several £100. So it was completely out of my league from the beginning. Obviously, people wanted it really, really bad because it was so good. and there were so few copies. I mean, it's a very private label. I don't think even there is any label information on it. So perhaps 500 copies released on vinyl back in '91, and all of them are safely tucked away in top collections all over
Oh,
the
yeah.
world.
Sure. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's yeah. I've never even tried to track down an original of it. Just like, nope, that ain't going to happen. Yeah, I've got the same Stormspell reissue you do.
All right, Alan, I'll be right back.
Sure thing. Let's see. Well, we've gone a long time talking about 80s British metal without showing any 7-inch stuff. So got to make sure we check that box for sure. Bands were still releasing singles, into the late 80s. It was a format, I think, that was kind of rapidly dying by that time. It was important in the early 80s still, very important to the new wave of British heavy metal and the first wave of Swedish heavy metal. But yeah, singles were probably a bit antiquated, and as people moved to CD, they just felt more and more out of place. But hey, sometimes you can only afford to go in and press up 2 songs, and some bands did. One of my favorites from this era is a single, and it's the only thing the band got released, and Kristian probably already knows which one I'm going to show. It is by a band called Charger. The track
I had my suspicions. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. I am nothing if not transparent. But yes, Desperados with Are You Out There? Really easy to spot. Picture sleeve, cool horse, dragon, chimera thing on the picture sleeve. Labels are, just kind of a silver with black print. Some of the musicians here, had been active in other bands on the new wave of British heavy metal scene. But those acts fell apart and Charger came to be. The band had a track on a compilation album somewhere around this time. The compilation it was one of the Ebony comps, but one of the later ones. And I don't remember if it's an 86 or an 87 appearance. But so they had that song, and then they got the one single out, and unfortunately that was the last anybody ever heard of them. This is fantastic. It doesn't necessarily sound like new wave of British heavy metal. It does sound like a British band that's moving forward. The Desperados track in particular is very high energy, big sing-along kind of chorus, but moving very, very fast. It's not speed metal, but it is very, very fast-paced traditional heavy metal. Are You Out There is a little bit more of like, everybody raise your fist, anthem, kind of, chant along to the chorus, but still a really good, super catchy song. So both tracks on this are absolute classics. 2 of the best songs from that era. It's always gotten kind of lumped in with new wave of British heavy metal, not because of the date. This, again, came out in 87, so it's a little too late for anybody's cutoff for new wave of British heavy metal. But there was always some debate about the date because it's not printed on the record anywhere. And so a lot of people would see it here. It's like, okay, UK band, heavy metal, must be from, 84. And a lot of people kind of got 1984 stuck in their head as the date for the singles release. For a long time, Metal Archives had it listed as 84. But again, there was no evidence the band existed until like 86 or 87 because the members were in other projects in 84. So it's like, no, this guy wasn't singing for Charger in 84. He was with another act I don't recall off the top of my head. Metal Archives has changed it since then. It shows 87 now, which as far as anyone's been able to nail down, is the correct release date. But a lot of people kept wanting to put it back in, with all kind of the new wave of British heavy metal classics, because it feels like it belongs there. It's a single, it's a monochrome sleeve, it's 2 great songs. And so you kind of want to put it with all the other great singles from that era. Instead, it's like, okay, it's in this later wilderness period alongside singles like the Elixir single from 85 and another one that Kristian, I think, is going to talk about later, so I'm not going to name it. So you still had some bands using the single format to good effect. But again, smaller bands not getting the singles, boom for metal was kind of over by then. So they get a lot fewer and a lot farther between. But yeah, the Charger single, this is one of my absolute prized possessions. It took me a long time to get a copy of this. It is a beautiful near mint copy. And yeah, if you call it New Wave of British Heavy Metal, okay, it's my favorite New Wave of British Heavy Metal single. If you say it's disqualified, come out in 87, I'll pick something else. That's okay. But it is good enough to be considered the best singles of the decade from the UK. I'll put it down very carefully over here.
Don't they have some compilation out as well?
They could by now. I do not know. Let's take a look. Let's see. Charger. There's nothing listed on Metal Archives, but they could be behind.
I must
on
be
that.
mixing them up with something else.
Again, they had to. What is the? I can see the cover of the comp. What was it? Does it say here somewhere? It's not one of the comps I have. The Metal Collection, Volume 1. Yeah. They have a song called Rock on that one. It's from 86 on Ebony. It's got just kind of like a weird black and white, almost pixely looking kind of cover. Not a very good cover like the earlier Ebony comps.
Okay. Well, I was certain that, High Roller or some of the European labels had issued hey, it's the single plus 3 demos sort of.
It would make sense. I don't.
I must be getting.
Yeah, I'm not seeing
any. Must have been a different band
like
with a similar cover, I guess. I mean, monochrome covers weren't that unusual back then, so.
It was the other band with a monochrome cover.
Yeah, one of the other bands.
Just the other one. Yeah, it couldn't have been more than 2 or 3. Okay. Yep. Marty, what you got next?
Well, I just realized as we were sitting here, one I should have pulled, and not because this is necessarily a good record. This is because the guy that's in the band was in a very influential band beforehand. And you talk about, we're talking about a lot of thrash metal and heavy metal, and then you got that gray area where it's a little bands did try to do the Def Leppard, get a little bit more glammy, and one of the repeat offenders here was one Paul Di'Anno, Paul Di'Anno's Battle Zone. This is the band's second album, Children of Madness. And you know what? It's not great. It really isn't. And here's a guy that, he always kind of he's my favorite Maiden singer. I'm just going to say it. I love the material he sang on. I love his soulful croon, but he also had kind of a punkish street brawler type of vibe to him too. It's just a nice union between, melody and, leather and studs, and here he's trying to appeal to more of the glam thing, and this is the only one I have, although I have heard some stuff on the debut, which I think there was a song Fallout. It was actually a pretty good song. Here there's some moments on here I haven't listened to it enough to really be. This guy looks like Carlos Cavasso's evil twin, doesn't it, from Quiet Riot? Nothing groundbreaking here. It's just kind of an interesting piece to have. And this is the second album, and then it was 11 years later where they came back with a comeback album, which I've never heard, but judging by the more modern Photoshop cover, I'm sure it's probably a bit more Pantera-ish just by the looks of it. But here you could see by the, the platinum blonded hair and the poofy do, and they were heading for something a little bit more commercial here. And it's kind of a bummer to hear a guy that maybe doesn't really have that range to struggle in that style. I just kind of wish he would have kept it a little more soulful, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Paul Di'Anno's Battle Zone. I mean, he rests in peace. He passed away this year.
Is the blonde guy John Wiggins?
I don't know.
Because John Wiggins is in that band.
It is. That's one of them. John Wiggins guitar.
Yeah, from Tokyo Blade.
And the guy that's blonde is Pete West, bass. Isn't that the dude from UFO?
UFO, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, there's some it's a bit of a lineup. He had some good players assembled with him there.
I don't know.
Did Paul write the material on that album, or did they all write it?
I have no idea.
Good question.
Because I think I haven't heard. I mean, I agree. Paul Di'Anno is also my favorite Maiden singer, but he didn't write any of the stuff. He just sang on it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that Paul Di'Anno has ever appeared on a great album after he left Maiden, unfortunately. I don't know if it's poor career choices or if he just wasn't up to par when writing his own songs. It's kind of a shame, really,
Yeah.
because
It is, and he kind of it kind of proves the fact that he did not have the stamina to go the long distance with Maiden. And I think the change they made, they picked Bruce Dickinson from Samson, and he was very much, he could sing the Paul stuff effortlessly and with paying tribute to it, but he could take it up a notch higher and go into the future of what Maiden needed. And I think it was the right choice. But God, there's just no denying all those singles and, Made in Japan and the first two albums, and there's no denying. It's just, yeah, he was sweetening up some really amazing material, but he had a unique voice, for what that music was. It was a unique voice for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, he was in and out of so many different projects, and there just never was another one that clicked. The best one I can think of for Di'Anno post Maiden, after Battlezone, he had a project called Killers.
Of course he did.
Gee, I wonder where he got that title from. The debut Killers album, Murder One, is pretty decent. It's not amazing, but it's another one. When did that come out? Let me check. I want to say it's early 90s. Yeah, it was 92. And again, it kind of went back, just kind of no frills, heavy metal sound, not trying to be too thrashy, not trying to be too punky or anything. Just kind of a good, straightforward sound. It actually would have been a cool, to see like a Killers and Slander kind of package, somewhere in a pub in London around 91, 92. But it didn't last long. But they did a second album as Killers. What's that one called? Wow, it's not even listed here because it's barely a heavy metal thing. Even it's yeah. Come on, you got to have the do not list the title of it. Oh wait, here we go. Was he, maybe Di'Anno wasn't involved in it, but yeah, they very much changed into called like Menace to Society. And there's songs like, it's kind of, gangster influenced, with songs about, shooting, drive-bys and stuff. Yeah, it was pretty bad. I'm looking for some
just as wise a career choice when the bassist in Ramones started his hip-hop group.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, like there's a song on here like Die by the Gun. There's another one called Think Brutal. I heard it years and years ago. I was just like, because I kind of liked Murder One. It was one I stumbled into thanks to college radio. I was like, that's actually kind of cool. But then the follow-up, if I remember right, they're like pictures from the band at the time too, and they're all wearing like the little like black skull caps and stuff. And you just think, this is going to suck. Work. So
the Oakland Raiders jerseys.
Yeah, exactly.
Di'Anno did do a collaborative album with Dennis Stratton, who was early on the guitar player for Maiden, and
that Gog Magog thing,
something,
right?
and Zoller's played it and sang it to me as we're listening to it, and he would tell you that Dennis Stratton was the best vocalist that was in Iron Maiden that never sang in Iron Maiden. He's like, he always said, go more sweet Stratton with those vocals. But yeah, they did a collaborative record together too. And
the Gog Magog EP is universally panned as one of the worst things committed to vinyl. It's rough.
Zoller loves Stratton's voice, so I'm sure if this is the one we're thinking of here, I don't know.
I don't know if it's. There were some people in Gog Magog with him. Man, we've kind of gone down the Paul Di'Anno rabbit hole here. But Kristian, do you remember who else was in Gog Magog with Di'Anno?
I have no idea. I used to own this 15 years ago, and I got rid of it.
Everybody gets rid of it
14 and a half years ago.
Let me check. I'm on the archives over here. Yeah, it's kind of a collectible EP because of Di'Anno, and it's not something you see every day. Who else? Pete Willis is in the band. Yannick Gears was in the band. Neil Murray and Clive Burr. So all guys.
And Dennis Stratton,
but not Stratton. No, so the Stratton one must be some other release.
Yeah, it must have been something else they did.
Unless does Stratton have any guest appearance on here? No, it doesn't look like. But yeah, no, the Gog Magog thing, it's so bad, it's almost a novelty record. I mean, the song titles, what have we got? I Will Be There, which is a cover from Russ Ballard. Then you have Living in a Fucking Time Warp. That's the title of the song. And the third and last track is It's Illegal, It's Immoral, It's Unhealthy, But It's Fun, which is a Jonathan King cover, whoever that is. 2 covers, one of them very silly, and a song called Living in a Fucking Time Warp.
Yeah. File under for completists only.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well put.
Okay, so the Dennis Stratton and Paul Di'Anno collaborative album was called The Original Iron Men.
Wonder
Paul
where they got that
Di'Anno,
name.
I saw a ranking 5 out of 5. Heavy Harmonies Forum.
I don't know that
2
one.
ex-Iron Maiden members, Paul Di'Anno and Dennis Stratton, made 2 albums back in the 90s together. I've never heard of. Wonder anyone knows them here. Music is a mix of melodic metal, hard rock, AOR, and I found it quite good.
Okay.
So yeah, this might be what Zoller played for me, and because I know Stratton sings on it as well as Di'Anno. And
okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew there were some other definitely named players on Gog Magog, but I couldn't remember if Stratton was one of them or not.
Yeah,
great. I just went down a Gog Magog rabbit hole for no reason whatsoever.
Oh, just enjoy it.
All
right,
guys. I
guys.
paid like $3 for that EP, and I've never wanted $3 back so bad in my life.
Right on.
All right, let's get this back on the rails.
That was a good, Di'Anno deserves a good tangent.
Yeah.
Best singer Maiden on the best Maiden albums. Come on, gotta.
Oh no, it's fine. But Kristian can get us back on the right path here.
Okay, going back to I think 1985 again. This one is Trojan. I suppose you're pronouncing it. Chasing the Storm. And this is a sort of a speed metal album. I know they had. I think they just released this one. Then they changed their name quite soon after to Talion. And the Talion record is more thrash metal. This is more speed metal / heavy metal. A good example of early speed metal from the UK, 1985. And I'm not sure there were many bands that sounded like this back in 85. And this was actually released on Roadrunner. So this must have sold at least fairly well, being on such a prominent label. One of the cool things about this is that as a Swede, this has sort of a special meaning to us because they use this heavy metal umlaut with the 2 dots over the O. And that actually means that in Swedish, this should be pronounced as tröjan. And tröjan in Swedish means the shirt. So this is a band that's called The Shirt in Swedish. And naturally, as a Swede, of course, you need to acquire by any means necessary the T-shirt from the band.
Nice.
So I now have a T-shirt that's called The Shirt.
It's a killer shirt too.
It's a killer
You have
shirt.
a shirt.
This is the shirt called The Shirt by the band called The Shirt.
The shirt.
I got this when they played in Sweden, I think last year. So they're still active. They're still playing shows, and they sound great. It's a great band, just as energetic as they were back in 1985. A great band to check out, if not for the shirt, but for the music. Yeah, I don't know. It's one of the things that I wanted to show because it highlights that there are good post New Wave of British heavy metal albums in the sort of early mid 1980s as well. Yeah.
And you know what? We've all kind of come out swinging on England here, but there is some killer shit in England. There 100% is. And I'm not a big New Wave of British heavy metal fan. I just am not well versed in it. But in spite of there being some duds, I think in the thrash, there's some killer shit too, which we're still digging through here. We'll get to some here in a minute.
Oh yeah, no, we've shown a lot of them so far, and we've got a ways to go here. But that's an amazingly good album. Kristian, and one I only found out about a few years ago. Actually, somebody recommended it when I had made a YouTube video. Like, have you ever heard the Trojan record? I'm like, nah, I never checked it out. And this is stupid, but the band name just always seemed very generic to me because there was a Sparta, there was a Spartan warrior, then there's a Trojan. It's just like, okay, this kind of sounded like another one of those kind of bands where I can't listen to all of them. And like,
You
no,
sort of expect them to sound in a certain way just because of the name.
yeah.
Had they been named like I don't know, something more speedy.
If they'd been named the Pants or the Shoes
or Iron Trojan or something like
just,
that.
Just something that would have sort
Steel
of
Trojan.
On the wrist.
Yeah, but the name just always struck me as kind of generic, so I never
Trojan Blade.
Trojan Blade, yeah.
The shirt blade.
A very nonsense name, but
yeah,
quite a few metal bands have names that make no sense whatsoever.
100%.
But yeah,
some of them Japanese for some reason. But that's a different YouTube.
That is a different episode. Yep. But no, it is a great album, and yeah, like you said, it's a great blend. It's very fast-paced, kind of traditional, leaning a little bit into power metal stuff, like getting closer to what the German bands were doing and what Halloween was starting to work on. Fantastic sounding. The only thing that holds it back once again is the production is not great. It's a bit echoey sounding.
Muddy, yeah.
Yep, bit muddy. But yeah, it doesn't ruin.
Which is kind of strange because Roadrunner was such an established label.
Yeah,
I think this was one of the earliest.
That's
Roadrunner
the thing.
releases,
It's real
so maybe
early,
they weren't really up to their later standards from the early albums. But
I think you're exactly right. It's almost too early in the Roadrunner catalog, to get a decent treatment. But yeah, it's a fantastic record. And the band, had been around since the early 80s. This was another one of those bands that was on the scene.
Yeah, they had quite a few demos out.
Tons of demos, but just the record deal didn't come together until too late. So it's an easy one for folks to look at and be like, oh, that band's, they came along too late. It's like, no, they were there. They were very much a new wave of British heavy metal band that just didn't get a break to appear on vinyl. Have you heard the demo stuff, Kristian? I'm not familiar with it.
Some of them, yes, and they're quite new wave of British heavy metal sounding.
Okay.
Not as speedy and power metal-y as the album. So perhaps they were too generic when the demos came out and the scene was already saturated with all of these other great new wave of British heavy metal bands. So it wasn't until they sort of became more extreme that someone discovered them label-wise.
I think there were some lineup changes along the way too, so maybe that also
could have been.
contributed.
I'm
to
not really that into their lineup.
I don't remember all the details, but yeah, no, it's a killer album. I think it's another one, and you've shown several good examples of these. Whereas, I think if people feel like this is a period that just doesn't interest them because it's going to be too slow or too bland or too generic, listen to some of the records Kristian is showing, and you'll see that, like Marty just said, there's a lot of good albums that came out in this time frame. They just all got overlooked. People were just paying so much attention to other scenes, both in the UK and beyond, that, a lot of these albums just didn't get the attention. And so the bands didn't get many chances to follow up. And so a lot of them were just one and done kind of releases, or one album and then, get back together 20 years later.
All right, I guess I am next, and no, Alan's next. I've seen you show this record before, Alan, so that's why I thought you showed it, but you did not.
Okay.
Alan, you're up.
Okay, let's see. Let's do this one real quick. This band started out again in the new wave of British heavy metal. Got their first album out in '84. They were on Neat Records. Had some known musicians. Brian Ross sang with them for a while. Of course, he sang with almost everybody for a while, so that doesn't narrow it down a lot. But the second album came out in '85. It's quite good. It is a band called Avenger with Killer Elite. Not the best album cover in the Neat catalog. It's got two very, very different fonts. So it's like we're killer, but we're highbrow at the same time. I don't quite get it. It's like saying napalm cupcakes or something. it just doesn't fit. And it just
Elite
has, like,
looks like it's on a wedding card.
yeah, the background, I'm guessing it's supposed to be like some kind of like fancy, yeah, like, silk tablecloth or satin. Yeah, I think it's supposed to go for more the elite part, but then the killer seems just even more out of place. I don't know. It doesn't quite work.
Cover was made by somebody that really likes scrapbooking.
Well, the killer part is actually, it's probably not showing up, but the killer part is like a foil. So yep, you've even got an extra little scrapbook touch there.
Mixed medium, very nice.
Yep.
For
But,
more pizzazz, more pop.
Yeah, on this album, by this time, Ian Davidson Swift is singing with the band. He did a lot of good projects, with Satan and Adam Kraft and this band. And this is another one. It's not as fast as the Trojan record that Kristian just showed, but it's another band that was kind of starting to move towards a British power metal sound. It's a lot more forceful sounding than typical new wave of British heavy metal bands had been. So they've taken that sound, they've updated it some, they're making it a bit sleeker. If this album could have gotten some traction and they stuck around to maybe make another album, say in 87 or 88, again, they might have started to spearhead a British power metal kind of scene. But of course, that didn't come to pass. And it's another late one in 85, 86, Neat Records influences kind of already run its course. So yeah, these albums didn't get a huge push. And the bands, eventually fizzle out. But it's a very strong album that kind of shows what these bands were capable of coming out of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, assuming they didn't get sucked into that, glam and hairspray kind of rabbit hole. For the bands that stayed out of the pyromania vortex that was swallowing way too many acts, some of these others were doing really cool stuff, but people just didn't pay attention. All right, Marty, now it's your turn.
Well,
your next cool one?
We're back into thrash here. And this album has always been I like it. It's kind of the realm that thrash in England was for me. But we're talking about Death Wish's Demon Preacher. This is the band's second album.
Nice.
This came out in 88. 87. Uh-oh.
I always forget about this.
I had it on my list as well.
Right on.
Yep.
This is a product of a band just kind of embracing its inner Metallica. And it's not a bad thing. I like it.
No, they do it really well.
They do it really well. I always like this cover. I think the cover is pretty iconic, actually. And I was when we were chatting, I was looking up to see what the members of this band went on to do, and none of them went on to do anything other than this. Maybe one guy did one other thing that didn't really take off, but it's kind of weird how the thread kind of stops here. They cut the thread right here, but yeah. And is the band still relevant? They're still
they're active since 2017, I think, but they haven't released anything.
Yep, this is their last. They did Sword of Justice demo at the Edge of Damnation, which I don't have, in 87, and Demon Preacher in 88. And it says status unknown, which is odd for Metal Archives because typically everybody's still active when it comes to Metal Archives. But yeah, I don't know. This is a solid record. I haven't spun it in a hot minute, but I always liked it enough to keep it, and probably will get the debut as well if I ever stumble upon it. But another product of a band in England being very heavily influenced by the Bay Area.
Yep. But yeah, they're one of the better ones, I think. I haven't
Agreed.
played this one forever.
Yeah.
But yeah, good albums.
All right, Kristian.
The debut Death Wish album was one of the first thrash albums I ever bought, actually.
Oh, cool.
By chance, because I thought the cover looked really nice.
It is a cool cover. Yeah.
Yeah. And it hasn't let me down. I still listen to it, both Demon Preacher and the first one. It's at the Edge of Damnation, I think.
Yep, that's it.
Really solid thrash albums, both of them. I mean, of course, they're influenced by the Bay Area, and they sound a bit like Onslaught as well. But still, they do their own thing, and they are unique enough that you can recognize the songs. Straight off the bat. So, great album. I'm going to talk a little while about this, the next one that I want to show. This one is the Hell Human Remains album. And this is kind of special. This one is released in 2011, but as you might or might not know, most of these songs were recorded or written in the 80s. And there's a bit of a backstory to this that I think I need to go through.
It's a
Of
good
course,
band.
this.
Go ahead. Sorry, that's a good band. Anyway,
Yeah,
go
it's a
ahead.
good band, and it's they don't get any points for the most original band name for a metal band. I mean, hell, how obvious is that? But it sort of fits the material quite well. They released a single in 1983, I think, which didn't really showcase the band at all. It was two songs that didn't really stand out when you compare them to the rest of the material. I mean, this band had several demos in the 80s that contained very long theatrical intricate songs that you really couldn't fit on a 7-inch. And they were known for being a great live act with lots of pyrotechnics. They used corpse paint very early, I think in 83, 84. So they were really, really ahead of their time. But the band never went anywhere until they got signed by Mausoleum, the Belgian label. And right about the time that they were supposed to release their first album on Mausoleum, the label went bankrupt. So the record was never released. And the singer, Dave Halliday, he had invested so much emotional and I think also financial energy into this band. He couldn't take it. He killed himself shortly after. And of course, the band folded and the project just went away. But they had all of these demos left, and the demos were circulated quite frequently in these tape trading circles. So everybody knew that this was a band that had great material. Why was this never released back in the 80s? People were asking themselves. And I mean, when I started listening to metal in the early 2000s or discovered these types of band in the early 2000s, they stood out. I mean, it was a very unique band. They sounded like nothing I had ever heard before. And I thought, too bad I'm never going to get a chance to see these guys or something like that. And now we fast forward to, I think, some 20 years later. And there's this metal festival in Europe, in Germany, that's called Keep It True that we usually go to every year.
I would love to go to that thing too. If I lived there, I would go.
Yes.
Probably, because there's a bunch of awesome old fart bands there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I think it was in 2009, they released a running order and a flyer that showed Hell on it. And all of us, we were amazed, and we thought, what the hell is this? They've resurrected Dave Halliday from the dead. No, and then it said vocals by Martin Welkier from Skyclad, and we thought, well, this is great. I mean, of course he doesn't sound a bit like Dave Halliday, but how bad can it be? This must be great, and we were looking forward to it. And then it never came to happen. They canceled the show, and everything went dead. And we were like, "Oh, it was just a pipe dream. They wouldn't have sounded good anyway. It was for the best. Maybe it's good the way it is." And then I think the next year we went to another German music festival. It's called Headbangers Open Air. And we were sitting out in the campsite in our party tent and drinking beer. And this guy from the UK, I think his name was Barry. He was a frequent visitor in the tent, and he said, "Hey guys, do you know what? Hell is going to release their album." And we were quite intrigued and told him that, well, but didn't they cancel the kids show last year? Yeah, but they got a new singer now, and he's really good, and they've re-recorded all of the old songs. I have some of them on my phone. Do you want to hear them? Or perhaps he had an MP3 player. I don't really remember. And we hooked it up to the stereo, and he played, I think it was the song Blasphemy and the Master. and we were struck by lightning. It sounded so good. It was heavy, it was varied, it was great, and the vocals, I mean, the vocals were insane. And we asked Barry, so who this vocalist? He sounds just like Dave Halliday. Yeah, it's the guitarist's brother, and he's an actor. He's not a metal singer, but he's an actor. And it was just incredible how.
And Andy
perfect-
Sneap is in that reformation.
Yes, he's actually the reason, and we found out about this later, that Andy Sneap was, as everybody know, he founded Sabbath, and he's a worldwide well-known record producer, and he plays in Judas Priest and all of that. Dave Halliday taught Andy Sneap how to play guitar back in the 80s. So Andy Sneap went to all of the Hell gigs in the 80s, and he was a big Hell fan. And when he got famous in the middle of the 2000s, he asked the remaining members from Hell, do you want to re-record the album just for fun at my studio? And they agreed, and they went there, and I suppose they brought in Martin Welkier at first, and then it didn't really work out, but then they brought in the guitarist's brother, and labels were sort of picking this up because they found out that this is actually a really, really good album. And I think they signed to Nuclear Blast, which is a major label, and it was promoted quite extensively. And once it was released, it was obvious that this was, I mean, for me, this is probably, it was released in 2011, and for me, it's the best metal album from the 2010s, the century of 2010. I think a big part of it is because of the singer. I mean, he shrieks, he snarls, he growls, he can do all of these types of voices. All of them fit the moniker Hell perfectly. I mean, it's actually what you think. If I go to Hell, they will play Hell in Hell, because that's what it's going to sound like. And the live shows, I mean, I've seen them several times, and since the singer is a classically trained actor, he's performing an act on stage. He's wearing a crown of thorns, and he's whipping and flogging himself, and he's wearing all of these, the outfits that the leper doctors used to have in the Middle Ages, with the funny nose and the strange cloth and everything. And it fits the music perfectly. This is like going to a Shakespeare play at a theater, and it's got a Merciful Fate soundtrack. It's that good. For me,
nice.
At least. So
they've
this
sadly
is
split up, unfortunately, it looks like.
Yeah, they released another album afterwards, which was kind of in the same vein, not quite as good. And I think the Wikipedia page says that they were busy recording another album, but that was in 2017 or 2018, and nothing's ever happened. And I suppose Andy Sneap is quite happy playing guitar in Judas Priest, so I don't think we'll see any more Hell albums, which is too bad. But it feels so right that they were allowed to release this finally after all of these years, and they were very they made sure that Dave Halliday got songwriting credit on all of the songs, so that his family will get paid royalties. I won't sit here and become emotional, but to me, there's a justice in this album being released after so long. They were owed.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've seen some live footage on YouTube, and you're right. They sound good. There is a definite Merciful Fate vibe to it, and it's cool. I don't have either of those records, but what I've heard has been solid for sure.
Yep.
I think the last time I saw them live, they played with Carcass and Ailstorm, which was kind of a funny setup. And all of these, all of these death metal guys, they after the show, they were talking, who the hell was that support band? They were great. So they really appeal to the more extreme metal listeners as well.
Yeah.
Even though it's not extreme in any way, it's just very unique sounding and very different, and that gets attention.
Definitely. Oh, that's good rundown on their history for sure. Yeah, they were always, the guys in Sabbath always cited them as a big influence on them, and that early single's always been like a big new wave of British heavy metal collectible, but it's not. I never liked it very much. You're right. The songs are very odd and very short, if I remember right.
Yeah, like 2.5 minutes.
Yeah,
all of the demos contain like 8.5 minutes epic stuff. You can't really put that on a single.
Yeah, but what they did put on the single, it just didn't. People still like the single a lot. It just never connected with me. But a crazy history for sure.
Good pick, good one, and Alan.
All right. Well, Hell eventually got Justice. Another band only got rough justice. That would be Titan. Segway Man, right there.
Cool cover.
Yeah, very, very cool cover, with the nice artwork on the, Night Warrior thing going on there. This was another one of the bands that had been active earlier on the new wave of British heavy metal scene. They had, really good lineup early on. One of the guys from Angel Witch, moved into this project when that original Angel Witch lineup was falling apart, or at least the classic lineup. And they put out an EP in '82. It's really good. It's, but they never got a chance to follow it up right away. This was another case where, I think like Kristian made the point earlier, by '82, the scene was really congested. And so, even bands that had a lot of talent just had trouble finding a deal. So Titan eventually they recorded the material, but they eventually folded and didn't get it released. So when this came out in '85 on Metal Masters, which is another label that kind of low budget stuff that was getting things out by these bands that had pretty much run their course. I don't think the band was even officially together when this finally got its release in 1985. So it's like, that's a cool album. Different lineup than what had been on the EP. So at least one or two of the songs from the EP are redone here with this lineup, but still really good versions of it. And it's like, wow, that's a great album. You guys should follow up or tour. Oh, you don't exist anymore. Well, that's kind of rough. So one of the most appropriately titled albums that I've shown tonight for sure. Titan had the sound, they had the musical chops, they had a really good set of songs, and the timing did not work out. So, and this, in '85, I think folks recognize that it was a good album, but wrong time. The band doesn't even exist anymore. There's not much you can support at that point. So sadly, they didn't do a thing. Now, this is another band that decades later has come back. They did release something, but is it original stuff or is it more of like a compilation? Let's see, because there's one from 2017, and I remember checking it out called Justice Served on High Roller. But is it new stuff or not? Let me check real quick. Recorded and mixed. No, looks like it is new material. There's no mention that it's just demos or anything. So Titan did get another chance. Like a lot of bands, they have come back. They are, of course, listed as active on Metal Archives.
Well, if you're 50-50 chance of being right, I mean, you might as well pick one. Might as well side on the side of optimism.
And then there's the unknown where the coin has landed on its edge and you're not sure. But the Titan album is a great one from this period for folks that, again, bands that had done the new wave of British heavy metal thing, but had the ability to have life after the fact. But there was just no support for the scene. All right, Marty, what is next, sir?
Well, we've already mentioned Andy Sneap and Martin Walkier, so you might as well.
Oh, yeah, it's time.
History of a Time to Come and Dreamweaver. These are probably two of the best thrash records from England. They just are. And came out on Noise Records, which always have a soft spot in my heart for that.
Mm-hmm.
The first one, History of a Time to Come, a bit more aggressive, a lot more tongue-in-cheek Satanism. But the stuff was really well written and made you want more. And they give you way more on Dreamweaver. This album is fantastic. More of a Pagan themed album. I think it's based on a book or a poem or a story or something. This thing, if I pulled out the lyric sheet in here, it is just absolutely plastered, and it's kind of the John Arch syndrome, right?
Yep.
How do you cram so many words and still be melodious or musical with the music you are trying to empower? And somehow Martin does it on this record. There's just it's a unique album. This is a very unique album. Doesn't really sound like anything really that I can think of. I mean, this is a kind of one of those bands that have such a unique sound to them. I don't know if that's just part of being English, but they're on a very German label, and obviously at this point, Noise has a English office, so you're starting to pull in some more English bands as well. They're trying to appeal to the home base that they're in, but I always thought this band was super unique, and I was very much into them. So when they put out the Morning Is Broken album after this, when Martin left, holy crap, it was a slap to the face. Different. In fact, I need to re-listen to that record. I might pull that record for the album club. Actually,
Marty,
that would be funny.
Marty, let's talk you off this ledge now. Look, yeah. Those guys are your buddies. Yeah, they help you out every week. Don't do things to them that you can't take back, son.
Sometimes they have to suffer, but
yeah, but Marty, you're talking about that third album. I same as you. I got it and was
punch to the face.
What the? After I played it, my thought I think was, I didn't know it was physically possible to package a piece of shit inside a record cover, but they somehow smashed it flat enough to slide it in there and seal it up in cellophane.
Yeah. Being here in America, I mean, I walked into Camelot and I saw that tape sitting there. I pulled on, like, holy shit. New Sabbath. Here we go. I can't wait. Bought that thing, got the vehicle, popped in the tape deck, and went looking at the tape, listening to them, looking at them, flipping it around. I'm like, what the fuck happened? What's wrong? What's wrong? But yeah, whatever. Yeah, but yeah, this to me, classics. This is shining achievement again. We're Onslaught early. The Force is a definite achievement. These two albums for sure are up there, and of course, the next one I'm going to show is related to that. So we'll get there here in a minute. But Kristian, you're back.
I'm back. Okay, so it's I think CD time again. And we've discussed this band already, but I needed to, for completist's sake, we need to show Zentrix. I wish I could have shown the Ghostbusters EP, even though it's bad. But
I got rid of it. I gave it to Darcy, actually, Ellen. I shipped it off in a box to Darcy.
Oh, okay.
But
it's got such a cool cover. I mean, the original cover with the Ghostbusters dude flipping you off. I mean, you can't go wrong.
Oh, you can. You hit play, and then you've gone wrong really quickly.
It was so bad, Marty literally exiled it to another country.
Oh, it was so bad. Yeah.
And I mean, of course, like we said earlier, these are just washed up Testament tracks repackaged in a British sort of deal, which of course by Testament standards means they're quite good still, but it's nothing. Yeah. It's nothing revolutionary. It's nothing new. It sounds pretty much like any other Bay Area thrash band. I think this one is a bit more varied than the debut album, so that's why I chose this one. It's not as much plagiarism as the first one, to me at least.
The first one, there was like direct plagiarized riffs. I mean, I was shocked. I'm like, wow, that's off of Practice What You Preach, or whatever. It's like I was shocked how close. They didn't even try to hide it. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but here they at least try to do their own thing, which to me is like A for effort, I guess. And as you said earlier, I mean, Britain wasn't really wallowing in these types of bands at this time, so perhaps they served their purpose anyway. This is on Road Racer, which I think it's the same as Roadrunner, right? But sort of different. So it's a major release as well. The band actually still plays. I've seen them a few times, and they're still good. But of course, nothing unique in any way. And they still play the Ghostbusters song as the encore, just so you know.
Thank
At least-
goodness.
Legends never die.
No, they don't. Props to the guitarist who shares my name, and he also spells it the correct way with a K and not with a CH. So I had to mention them just because of that.
So how do you? Because I look at your name, I say Knutsson, but it's Knutsson.
No, it's Knutsson.
Knutsson. Okay.
Yeah. It's from Knut, which is a Danish or Norwegian name from the beginning. There are lots of kings from Norway called Knut, like 1,000 years ago. But it basically means Knut's son.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, nothing special about it.
All right. Good pick. And Alan, you're up.
Yeah, good follow up with Zentrix there. Something we didn't touch on with the whole thrash, issue in the UK is, yeah, they were, maybe having to catch up to the US scene because it was one of the few styles of metal that the UK didn't invent in the 80s. There's also, well, two things, I guess. One, the UK already had, sort of an extreme metal scene developing just on a different axis, through grindcore with Napalm and Carcass and stuff. So even if they had started having more thrash bands pop up like in 85 or 86, it wouldn't have seemed as extreme as what they were already doing. It's like, okay, here's this new thrash band in the UK in 1985. Great. You've got to somehow one up, what, Napalm Death is doing. Good luck with that. So in a way, they just didn't need that style, to be their like end boss of extremity for heavy music in the UK. Another thing is, and this may have been another thing from John Tucker's work, some people have asserted that, one reason thrash, started to crop up very rapidly when it did in the US is that it was a pushback against the glam scene. That, you had, bands like, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister being a big one, that were getting, very much into, the whole, the hairspray look and, the makeup and everything. And that thrash was sort of, more the, masculine pushback against the, feminization, the very femmy look of, the glam bands. And since the UK didn't really have a big glam metal scene, again, there wasn't necessarily a need to push back against that. I'm not sure I really agree with that take on it, but it's something that occurred to me as we've been talking. It's like, yeah, people have proposed that thrash was, screw that, because that was always the kind of, the big battle cry for thrash bands early on too, death to posers, fuck those bands that are all lipstick and hairspray, that, there was, an open hostility towards that. But there was nothing to be hostile towards necessarily in the UK scene. So maybe another reason that, the UK thrash scene didn't develop on the same axis. Anyway, let's maybe get back on track and show a record. This is a fun one. I've shown it before. It's worth it for the name alone, but a really good, solid EP2. 1988 sees the only release from Britain's Wild Pussy.
The best kind.
And this really is the best kind. EP is called Mechanarchy, and it is, obviously you look at it and you figure it's going to be like some kind of just maybe novelty thing. It is a driving EP, really hard-hitting, heavy-handed, just pure heavy metal. It's, one part thrashy, but it's a lot of traditional heavy metal roots in it as well, but they're all just really amped up a lot. Trying to think of a good analog, and actually, Marty, something you and I have been doing our homework on lately that comes to mind. They kind of fill a niche similar to Rage in the German scene, where they're not trying to be like as fast and speedy as, a Halloween or, maybe early Running Wild. They're definitely not trying to be as thrashy as like a Creator or a Destruction. Rage kind of sits, in that nexus in the middle, where it's using a little bit of all that stuff to develop a really solid heavy sound. Wild Pussy kind of does the same thing. And it's a real shame that, they never got a chance to follow it up. All 4 songs on here are quite good. But there was no follow-up. This was a pretty limited release at the time. It's lived in the underground for a long time. I mean, the cover, the color scheme, the name alone is going to get people to stop and check it out on the rare occasion it shows up. But thankfully, it did get reissued just a couple of years ago. It wasn't a High Roller reissue. Kristian, do you remember who did this one?
No, I don't.
Let me check here real quick.
Might have been No Remorse in Greece, perhaps.
Oh, that would make sense. Let me see. Oh, okay. It's on something called Obscure New Wave of British Heavy Metal Releases. Okay. That doesn't...
Never heard of that one.
I haven't either. And it's weird because it's not a new wave of British heavy metal act at all. These guys were not around earlier in the decade. But so yeah, if hearing maybe and again, maybe this is a stretch, but I want to throw it out there. Maybe the UK's equivalent of Rage during the 80s. If that sounds interesting to folks, there's a reissue. It's not hard to find or expensive anymore, so not too hard to check out. But yeah, fantastic EP. This band should have been given a chance. It would have been a real highlight on the British scene, I think, around 88. This is a band that could have, been put on a package with something like Sabbath, and Onslaught, from that era, and absolutely held their own.
I always wondered about the name. Is it Mechanarchy or Mech Anarchy?
Good question. I've always pronounced it Mechanarchy, but yeah, I might be butchering that a bit. I'm not sure.
And you can't really tell by looking at the cover because it's just yellow.
Yeah, there's stuff going on there, but yeah, it doesn't reveal much. It doesn't shed any light on the name situation.
It's probably Mech Anarchy. I mean, it's keep anarchy the way it is, and Mech Anarchy.
Yeah, mechanized anarchy was how I always kind of broke it down in my head.
Got to throw a clown on the cover. Of course you do.
That probably didn't help their fortunes any. Anyway, Marty, what's next in your
Well,
stack?
we're looking about a half hour here, and I'm still twiddling about in the thrash realm. So I'm going to pound through a few here. First up, we mentioned Sabbath, and Martin Walkier leaves Sabbath and brings a couple other guys with him to form the band Skyclad. That's probably why the Morning is Broken Sabbath album sounds completely different, because it's a different lineup. But
yeah,
here you go. This is it sounds a lot like Sabbath. It sounds like the spiritual continuation of Dreamweaver, but you've got violin added to the combination, which is kind of, for its time, pretty groundbreaking. This came out in 1991. 91.
Okay.
Noise International, BMG. So it's kind of a big deal. In fact, they've got their guitar sponsors on the back of the thing: Gibson, Pasty Cymbals, Marshall Amplification. I mean, this is obviously some resources are being poured into this iteration of Martin Walkier's vision. But this is a very good record. I always loved this record. The lead off track, Sky Beneath My Feet, where the violin comes in, and like the guitar, the hits on there. It's just exciting. It's exciting. It's different. It feels awesome to hear, thrash being innovated a little bit, especially from an English band. They're doing something different. They're combining thrash metal and pagan themes here that suits the sound and the style and Martin's voice and lyrical concepts perfectly. So, yep, that. Here's three that I've always found to be pretty substandard, and that would be Reanimator's Condemned to Eternity. Has the Deny Reality with the monkeys in there, and this is just Slayer and Metallica worship. It's decent. It's not groundbreaking. You've got Cerebral Fix, another band that came out of this whole thrash explosion, another band that is kind of influenced heavily by punk. And I always thought this band was pretty mid-paced and kind of boring. But I have two other albums, so, fuck me, right? And then you've got Damn, Inside Out. This is another one of those bands another mid-paced band, another Noise International band that I sampled back in the day, and was left a little, I don't know, it's okay. It's to sit here and call these bands bad, it's kind of shitty, but it just, they just don't come from a point of excitement. You know, when you're thinking thrash metal, there's got to be an element of excitement to it. If the band is deficient in that department, then your band is going to suffer. And don't even get me on Acid Rain. I mean, Mosh. There's no way if I ever did see that in the store, I wouldn't have bought it because it's called Moshkinstein, or the other one they had the pink cover. I would have never bought that shit.
Yeah.
Sight unseen.
The first one's no. If you can get past the cover, the first one musically is quite good.
That's what I'm told.
Yep.
But
you do have to get past the cover. No, it's a good album. And with some of these later British ones, to be fair, as you get later and later in the decade, it's not like a lot of the thrash coming out of the U.S. scene was top notch anymore either. The scene was bloated, and you were getting a lot of bands signed.
Times are changing.
Didn't necessarily need to, weren't ready for that big league. So yeah, to be very fair, it wasn't just late 80s British thrash that maybe is a step below. You could say the same for a lot of U.S. bands. I'm looking at you, Defiance.
Oh yeah. Defiance, yeah.
They're always my kind of go-to for. I'm sorry, they're not even second-rate thrash.
Power Mad is another one.
Power Mad's not.
Hey, I like
thrash.
They don't suck, but they're not.
They've got some good songs, but yeah, and they're thrash, but built on like more of a traditional metal framework. So they had kind of a different sound. They tried something.
Thrash, probably.
Yeah, power thrash would be a good way to phrase it. Yeah.
Speaking about Skyclad, was there any folk metal bands before them, or were they actually the first folk metal band?
They're usually cited as like one of, if not the first, to really kind of start up the whole folk metal thing, which got more and more popular and crossed over into other genres as the 90s went on. That's a good point, Kristian. So very groundbreaking in that sense.
Yeah, they were, and I think they influenced quite a lot of black metal bands who used folk and pagan influences as well. So they really deserve. It's good that you mentioned them, Marty, because they really deserve mentioning as one of the pioneer bands from that period 100%. Of time.
Yeah.
It's a glaring hole in my collection, unfortunately. I've never been able to track down any of the Skyclad albums. I do like them, but never been able to own one of them. Too bad. But
if and to your point about them influencing black metal, if Donnie Filth didn't just obsess over Martin Walkier's songwriting and lyrics, I will eat the top hat that his drummer wears. They definitely had impacts on some of those.
Well, you want to talk about impact? The violin. I mean, I haven't gotten here yet, but you got My Dying Bride.
I was thinking about that as well. Somebody better show the My Dying Bride albums.
We'll get there.
Yes.
We'll get there.
I'm circling around here
too. Yep, we got time for like two more rounds here, I think.
2 more rounds? Oh my God. We're just 2.5 hours in. I'm just getting started. Someone mentioned top hats. So we need to show this one.
Dangerous segue.
There you go. This is a really weird one. We were talking about glam metal stuff. And this is sort of glammy. But I mean, you just got to show the band picture.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can see the top hats. I mean, did these guys like A Clockwork Orange or what?
Well said.
And unfortunately, this isn't the original release. This is a later re-release on, I think, Black Widow, on pink vinyl, of course.
No, of course.
There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek going on here. I'm sure you can understand what 9 Inch is referring to. That coupled with sexually starved nuns, and
it was originally released as like a 9-inch vinyl, right?
Perhaps.
I like that disappointed look you just shot you too, by the way, Al. That was a very disappointed look.
But apart from that, this is actually a quite good album. It's heavy. It's not glammy in the Mötley Crüe sense. It's more. I think if they didn't show the band members on the back, this wouldn't have gotten the glam moniker, I think, because there's not much glam to it. It's a odd and quirky heavy metal album with songs like Pig Feeder and Time
Yep.
Machine of the Poison Lake. It doesn't sound very glammy. There's not much, sex, drugs, and rock and roll to this. It's about a whole lot of other stuff. And then there's, of course, the title track 9 Inches of God, which we won't get into detail exactly what that one's all about, but I think you can probably imagine. So yeah, this one is I think from 1986 originally, and it must have been totally incomprehensible when it was released. I don't think people got it, and probably why it never saw much of a distribution, being a private release, and I don't think the band ever released anything else like it. It sort of makes me think about, there's another British band called Agony Bag that released a single. Yeah, keep laughing.
Random words put together. Agony Bag. Yeah.
Agony Bag. Rabies is a killer. And it's a great single. It's not metal. It's glammy hard rock, but really quirky and weird and naughty in a way. Released a few years earlier, I think. So maybe it was sort of inspired by that. But yeah, it's a interesting album from the scene that doesn't really get much appreciation.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a weird album. You're exactly right, Kristian. It's hard to describe the sound they were going for. You're right, there's a little bit of glamminess to it, but it's more like the sleazy side of things, not the silly side. But yeah, it is a fun one to listen to from time to time. Yeah. But yeah, very, very, very strange. In some way, it reminds me a little bit of something like Ripper, The Dead Shall Rise album, where it's got a little bit of camp is part of it, a little bit of, with the costume, a little bit of theatricality.
That's the horror metal thing they went for.
They went for more.
You could argue that if you're inspired by A Clockwork Orange, yes, there's quite a lot of horror in that, so perhaps.
No, they don't really go for a horror vibe on the Deep Switch album. You're right, but yeah, I think maybe there's some parallels, because the Ripper album is another one that's a little atypical, even sound wise, in terms of trying to pin it down. Cool stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, cool stuff.
Back to you, Alan.
All right, let's do this one next. I talked about this one some video not too long ago, but it fits in here very nicely. It is Bitches, Sins, Invaders album. This is one, let me get it out of the case so there's not as much glare. Weird Struthis. Yeah. No, that's an album cover that was actually pressed up and released and attempted to be sold to people.
It went by every quality control there was, and everybody gave it the thumbs up the whole way down the line.
This was on like a King Classic. So King Classic and quality control are not phrases that really line up all that well in the first place. But
and I suppose you know the painting that it's inspired from.
Oh yeah, it's definitely pulling this part is from the famous Scream painting. This part with these characters is from another painting.
Somebody's basement.
Yeah, someone's 13-year-old brotth with colored pencils came up.
That's what like there's 4-year-old did in daycare or something. But now Bitches Sin, another band that was on the new wave of British heavy metal scene very early. They were right there, kind of the crux of things in 80 and 81, and built some momentum with some compilation appearances, a BBC appearance. They got signed by the heavy metal label, one of the, not the biggest metal label on the scene, but one that had a good stable of bands. And then the debut album came out, and this is why you really can't afford to miss on your debut album. When that album came out, it had a great cover. I think the original pressing even had like an embossed cover. They put a little razzle dazzle there on it. There are people that like that album, and bless their hearts for doing so, because it is not an easy album to love. It has some good songs on it. The album is called Predator. It came out, I think, in 82. And it's one of those albums where like the second side's not bad, but boy, the A side has a hard time ever getting in gear. you get to the end of side A and you're like, this has not gone well. And it just sucked every bit of momentum out of the band. It's not got a good production. There's just too many songs that are really flat. And it's weird because they had a good stable of really top songs, but it didn't come together on the album. So they lost all their momentum. They couldn't ever get, obviously heavy metal didn't want to do another album for them. Other labels kind of backed off and shied away. So yeah, it wasn't, for a while. They got an EP out here and there and stuff, but yeah, they didn't get to release Invaders until 86. So again, a 4-year gap when the whole scene completely turns inside out. There was so little interest in Invaders that, like I said, this came out on King Classic. That's an American label. This didn't even get released in the UK until 1989, 3 years after the album somehow got a release in the US. And
with different songs as well, right?
Yeah, well, different songs, a different band lineup. It got really messy. King Classic lost the masters. So when the band wanted them back for it to get released in the UK, they're like,
whoopsie.
Tapes? What tapes? What had happened, apparently King Classic had licensed the cassette release to another label, probably without letting the band know. And the other label never sent them back to King Classic, because then you end up, the cassette version is a little different from the King Classic version. And so when they wanted to release it in the UK, finally they had a new lineup, had to go back into the studio and redo the album from scratch, essentially, which obviously did not sit well with them. So yeah, let's see. This version of the CD has both the King Classic and the here's the British cover. So Marty, have we improved, gone down, or shifted laterally here?
That's an improvement. I like that cover.
Do you? Okay, fair enough.
Way better than that colored pencil bullshit in the on the cover.
Giant clay-looking space baby.
Yeah, it looks like a comic book illustration, which is cool.
Okay, I could buy that. Yeah,
at least it looks like an Invader. I mean,
yeah.
First cover doesn't really have any connection to the title.
I don't know if these guys showed up.
They're lurking in the background.
If they show up in your dreams, you might feel invaded.
That's stretching it, Alan.
I'm trying. I'm trying to help them out because I like Bitches Sin. They did a lot of good material over the years, and both versions of the album are very good. And both versions, there's some tracks that overlap, but yeah, the British version ends up with a few newer songs they had worked on in the 3 years in between. So it's a cool album with a lot of good tracks, good performances, but yeah, a strange release history. And I think it's a great example of what we've talked about throughout the episode, that they couldn't even get it released in their own country for 3 years after the fact. There was that little interest or motivation from anybody to put it out locally. But yeah, Bitches Sin, good catalog. The Predator album, again, people like it. John Tucker holds it, pretty high. If both sides sounded like side B, I think you could get somewhere. But that A side that's kind of a deal breaker for me. I can't get into that A side of that album at all. So yeah, that's where we're at with Bitches Sin. So Marty, we are getting late on the clock here, but I've got 2 or 3 left. I can pair a few things up if we want to.
I can go around another trip and cram a bunch of shit together. It'll be good. Okay. We're finally getting to the era that really started to redefine British ingenuity, I guess, and it's by way of the punk scene again. And 1987, we got Napalm Death Scum.
Yep.
I don't know if this is the first ever grind album, because this was influenced by bands like Concrete Socks and Heresy, which were more or less punk bands that went really fast.
Yeah, and you could make a case for the Repulsion demo in the US.
Repulsion demo and the Japanese stuff too, and SOB.
Oh yeah,
Siege or what? I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, SOD from '85.
So you got this, and also in 1987, I believe it was, the debut Unseen Terror album came out. This is Appeal Sessions.
Cool.
What's known about this is Shane Embury from Napalm, who would go on to join Napalm, was playing drums on this. And actually, he's a pretty good drummer, pretty good grind punk drummer. I was kind of surprised. And of course, a little more on the punk leaning side, but also part of this whole 87 to 90s, the Peel sessions of Extreme Noise Terror. This was a band that very grindy, but very punk. You got two vocalists, which is very much a punk aesthetic. Always a fun, always a cool band for sure. And of course, I've already showed Bolt Thrower, so I'm not going to show that again, but Bill Steer leaves Napalm Death and starts his own thing with Jeff Walker from Electro Hippies and Ken Owens. I don't remember what band he was in leading up to this, but Rika Putrefaction, the debut Carcass album, is born, and this is a about as messy sounding album as the cover itself. But yeah,
Yep.
Original pressing here. I bought this for $1.99. You guys don't want to know that. I got this in a local
Humble
shop.
brags.
Yeah, I got it for $1.99 here at New Moon Records in Traverse City because the lady who was the wife of Bob Seger's tour manager, Bob Seger lived around this area. They owned that store, and she didn't know what metal was, so she just marked all the shit super cheap. So yeah, the grind era is very influential. It kind of, in bands like Carcass too, they're like one of the initial, they also were born out of the grindcore era, but they inspired a whole nother subgenre of metal called gore grind. And there's just a legion of bands that copy them. And as with Napalm, as with all these in Bolt Thrower, I mean, they're suddenly we're merging. Actually, it's starting about the same time that all these thrash bands are happening and struggling in England, but it's doing something that thrash, bands like Cerebral Fix and Reanimator or Reanimation or whatever the hell that name of that band was. They're injecting excitement and urgency and fire and passion into the sound, and it still rings true to this day. It's England is becoming an innovator again as far as metal goes, and here we're going to touch in another couple subgenres of that. You know what? Since we're running out of time here, I'm also going to, another guy that was on the debut Napalm Death album. Dennis showed this last night. There was a heavy metallurgy last night with Dennis, but Justin Broderick. He was the drummer on the first side of Scum, I believe. He was in Napalm Death. He started his industrialized plotting mixed with Swans, mixed with, just industrialized, crusty, punky metal thing. And which also inspired other bands from England as well to kind of rip off that style. So you got Pitch Shifter's debut Industrial, which Broderick was very pissed about because this is, in a lot of ways, more of a crust punk version of this. So, I mean, these are two, in fact, even the covers, the faces, the zoomed up. I can see how Justin was pissed about this. But again, England, this whole born out of the punk scene, becoming innovators and pushing extreme music in interesting directions. This whole industrialized metal thing is certainly, it didn't take flight like a lot of the other subgenres have, but it has its fans base. And Godflesh is a band. They broke up for a while and but they're back again and doing what Godflesh does. And that's plotting mechanized suffering, basically. So yeah. And I've got a couple more instances I can show here in my next go around. So Kristian, you're up.
Yep. Okay.
Last call.
If we're running out of time, I think I need to combine some of mine.
I'll be right back.
You've been talking about bands that play real fast, so I need to talk about bands who play real slow. And we haven't really touched on the doom metal things yet, so I might as well bring this one. It's kind of hard to see because the cover is really
I can see it.
it's the warning watching from a distance.
That's one of the saddest albums ever made, by the way.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say that this is released on Metal Supremacy Records, and I mean most of the doom metal bands, the earlier doom metal bands, if you had Black Sabbath and they were based in blues, and you have Pentagram and they were based in sort of 60s psychedelia. Warning is based not in any of those. It's based in pain and loneliness and despair and just utter hopelessness. Everything about this album is depressing. The guitars are echoey and the drums are hollow and distant and the vocals are anguished. I think the British magazine Kerrang, they chose this album as the bleakest metal album ever released, and that must account for something, I think. It's one of those love-hate albums. You either think it's really, really great because it's very extreme in a way, but there are also people who hate it because the vocalist is too whiny and it sounds like a lot of other similar doom metal albums. So love it or hate it, but it's a very special album. It's similar, I think, to While Heaven Wept in a way, a British doom metal band. Their first album, Sorrow of the Angels, sounds a bit the same, but it was released a few years earlier. This one was released in 2006. And one of the most acclaimed, I think, doom metal albums from the UK in later years, showing that there is some form of revival in the scene from the UK. And I think the band doesn't really exist anymore. I think the main man now plays in this band that's based on a speaker label. I mean, it's Sun with sort of parentheses around.
Oh yeah, the Sun.
Yeah, it's a special thing, which is mostly noise based, I think.
Drone,
drone-ish. And another example of great British doom metal from the 2000s is probably this one.
Oh yeah,
the Pagan Altar.
Yes,
that shit is good. It really is. They're a good band.
Yeah,
Still are.
This one is probably the best of them, I think. I mean, there's some history to this band. They were around as early as perhaps the late 70s, but didn't get to release their first album until 1998 or something, which says a lot, I think. But they really reinvented themselves with this one. This is also sort of like Skyclad, a bit folksy.
Very.
Sort of big, rooted in British traditionalism, paganism. And I think, to me, this is probably the best album of the 2000s for me personally. I think every song on this one is an absolute masterpiece. I can listen to it all day. Unfortunately, the singer is no longer with us. He passed away a few years back. It's actually this weird that the singer and the guitarist was father and son.
Father and son, yeah.
Yeah, but the singer was like 18 when he got his kid, so they felt more like brothers. But yeah, special band in many aspects. So, yep, great one. I will stop there. I think I have one more showing. I can do more, but I can combine if we're short on time. You guys decide.
Okay.
We're good. All right, Alan.
All right. I'm going to wrap up with my last handful, but yeah, we'll let Kristian do one more.
I can do one more after this. So
okay, well then I'll show two now and I'll show two on the last pass. Okay. That'll work. So for this round, let's show this one. A band called Omega. The album's called The Prophet. Came out in '85, if I remember right. They kind of came out of the ashes of a new wave of British heavy metal band called Apocalypse, who had a little different sound than many acts from that scene. Apocalypse leaned a little bit more towards a doomier sound. You wouldn't call them a doom metal band, but the vocalist in particular, his vocal style, has a little bit more of the Ozzy, kind of sound, loans itself to having a little more of a doom inflection. But Apocalypse only got one single released. So, lineups changed. Eventually the band changed names. And as Omega, they did get the one LP out. The cover kind of gives you a good idea that this is going to be something a bit different. It's not going to be, a raging headbanger of an album or anything.
It doesn't have "Buy Me" from the screaming from the record shelf.
It doesn't
cover.
Yeah, it doesn't even have metal screaming from the shelf.
No, it looks like a prog album.
Yeah.
It kind of does, yeah. And in a sense, it feels a little bit like that. That they were probably trying to, here's a band again. We've talked about it with different examples all episode. These bands were pushing. It was the ones that weren't going down the glam hole were definitely looking for ways forward, and unfortunately, most of them just didn't get much attention. Yet this particular band looked more in a progressive direction. It's not an annoying kind of prog whatsoever. And again, it's got some sadness, a little bit of doomy tinges to the music. But yeah, makes for a very, very good listen and kind of a unique band and album from that scene. Not many other bands tried pushing in that way that I can think of, at least. So yeah, Omega the Prophet, just another obscure one that couldn't find any legs on that mid 80s British scene. But I think the album holds up really well. Let's see, one more for this round, heading to the last round. Here's a band I had kind of forgotten about until I started digging around for stuff to talk about. And I have never heard a single person on YouTube mention this band's name, but they made several albums in the more like, what era is this? Late 80s into the no, actually more 90s. This is when's okay. I'm sorry. That's how long it's been since I looked them up. This album's from 99. The band is called Stairway. The album is called Bleeding Heart. And they released several albums. They are just very good, straightforward, traditional heavy metal. If folks are familiar with the Slander album that Kristian showed earlier, take that template, but add some really, really hot shot lead guitar work just all over the thing. And you're in the right ballpark for Stairway. The other thing with Stairway is they're a Christian metal band. Don't know if we've named many Christian UK metal bands tonight. That seems to be more of an American contrivance. But yeah,
and a Swedish one too.
And the Swedish, yep,
Yes.
Good point.
There's a Swedish Bible Belt, if you didn't know.
Really?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
because you don't think of Sweden as a particularly religious country, but
no, we have them all crammed up at the same place.
You kind of cornered them early on.
Wrangled.
But Stairway started, their first album came out in 93. The Bleeding Heart one I just showed was from 99. And then they also got, some albums out through the 2000s. It looks like they released something as recently as 2016. I have not heard the last few. But yeah, somebody back in the tape trading days, sent me 3 or 4 of theirs, like, a couple of TDKs of stuff. And again, it's not very preachy. It doesn't come across that way. It's not extreme metal at all, but the guitars are really the thing that will stick with you. Just really, and they make it sound effortless, but just great solo after solo, and the songs are good too. They still suffer that kind of same low end production that we've talked about a lot, that kind of plagues British bands sometimes. But yeah, I've been meaning to go back and replay all of these, and so I got to at least Bleeding Heart this week, leading up to our show. So if folks, if anything I've said sounds interesting, again, Stairway, it's not a name that's going to inspire you to be like, I'm in the mood for some fist banging metal. I want to hear Stairway. It doesn't work. It doesn't even come close. I'm guessing it's a Stairway to Heaven kind of reference. But check out something like Bleeding Heart. You'll enjoy the guitar work on it if absolutely nothing else clicks. But just good, solid, no nonsense heavy metal. Stairway.
All right. We really haven't talked too much about death metal. And, early on death metal in England, I've kind of gone on before here how I thought it was a little boring. Cancer being one of those bands, this is Death Shall Rise. I listened to this tape enough I can sing along with it. It's good. It's solid. It's just very mid-pace. Old school death metal. Not a lot of excitement to it. Some good riffs. James Murphy on guitar here during the time when there just wasn't enough bands for him to be in the US, so he went over to England there for a minute. And
so Murphy sounds really good. I mean, his performances are always good, but I think he's particularly good with some of his solos on that album.
Oh yeah. And then we've got the debut album by Benediction, Subconscious Terror. This is the big thing here is they started off with Mark Barney Greenway, who
Mhm.
after this album leaves and joins Napalm Death for Harmony Corruption, replacing Lee Dorian in the lead vocal spot. But this is another one of those bands. This is a decent record. My favorite by this band is Transcend the Rubicon. I think that is probably their finest moment. They're back together again. The album that came out, I think it was called Spheres. I could be wrong. I can't remember. Decent, mid-paced, old school, decent. They got a new one that just dropped or is about to drop.
I think it's already out. Yeah.
Yeah. If we can go one more round, cool. I can wrap up everything then.
Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
we can do one more round.
But yeah, English death metal. It's there. There's been bands since then. Cruciamentum, good band. There's been others, but I tried to focus on older stuff, the roots of it. And yeah, those are two bands that were definite. I'm missing some, of course, but
yeah, they may not have gotten as much attention as a Deicide or a Death, but both those bands have always had a pretty dedicated fan base.
Yep.
So yeah, there's some quality.
And they're
stuff
still
there.
together. I mean, so it's a testament to their longevity. People like them.
Yeah.
So
Cancer just put out a new album last month.
you just reviewed it here on Heavy Metallurgy.
Yeah, and it's a pretty solid album.
Yep. All right, Kristian.
Yeah, is this my last round or second last?
This will be the last one. Yep.
This will be the last one. Okay, then I'll just go through the rest of my pile real quick.
Sure.
A few great heavy metal bands or albums from late 80s from England. I'm not going to try and pronounce this one.
Tiger Myra?
Tiger Myra or Tiga Mira? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yep. Great record. Late ebony kind of stuff.
What's the name of that record for people that are just listening to this? On,
sorry. It's Deliverance.
Oh, right on. Cool.
Yep. My records are falling over, so I need to adjust some things. We have the Lost, I think, Clovenhoof album in the 80s. Really good one, sort of melodic. They use keyboards. Oh my God. Still playing. I think they recruited Harry Conklin from Jag Panzer on vocals, which is kind of funny because the longtime singer Russ North passed away recently, but it will be interesting to see what they sound like with Harry Conklin on vocals.
Yep.
But the one that I really wanted to show was we need to have an obscure one, a really obscure one. So we have this one. It's the Shock Split EP. And this is a weird, it's from 1989. It's a 4-track EP. Not really much more info on the band. I think they had a cassette out as well. And this is labeled as shock and roll, which is not. It's more of an epic hard rock, epic metal thing, especially the song The End Is Nigh. Great vocalist, very accomplished singer, and something that I think needs to be re-released with the demos or the demo. I can't really remember how many they released in the same era. That must be as good as this one. This is a definite High Roller or No Remorse or any of those
cult metal classics.
Cult metal classics. Pick this up for God's sake. It's great. And yeah, the second last one I'm going to show is the Virtue. This is a compilation, a newer compilation. Of course, the single from 86, I think, is Legendary, heavy metal single. This also includes a demo that's a bit more power thrash oriented, and the songs are, well, I'll be damned, just as great. More of a faster, thrashier, heavier style than the single. So great compilation to pick up. Unfortunately, just 5 songs, which might be a little on the light side for a compilation, but hey, that's all the material that they released.
That's all you got.
That's all you got. And my final release, I mean, I have this shirt on which says Solstice, so I need to show a Solstice album. I mean, they started out as a pure doom metal album in the 90s, and they've evolved to some form of pagan British Manowar heavy, victorious kind of
Yep.
thing. And this EP, the Death's Crown is Victory EP, it's pretty darn excellent. It's 2 songs that are about 10 minutes long, 2 shorter ones that are instrumentals. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. Also, unfortunately, the singer Paul Kearns, who was on this, is no longer in the band, which is a shame, I think, because he's the best vocalist that the band has ever had. This is one of those bands that changed more members than some of us change underwear, which probably says a lot. I don't know why, but yeah, too bad. I think they're still playing, recording, but yeah, not sure what will come out. This one you should get, definitely. So that's probably the last one for me. If we're wrapping things up, I'll just thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely, man. We appreciate it. And anytime
great.
you want to come back, seriously, we can.
Yeah,
do
let's
this again.
do a special on Danish or Finnish metal bands.
Oh, yeah, fun.
We've got tons of those too.
Yeah, a lot of good ones to wrap up with there. I don't know what's going on with Solstice currently. I know a couple of years ago, Rich Walker was having some pretty serious health issues that they was having to deal with, but I haven't heard any updates about that.
Getting old is hard.
Over a year. Yep. And yeah, The Virtue is an absolute classic. That was the other single I alluded to that came out around this period that should be part of the new wave of British heavy metal. It's a little bit late, but yeah, it's amazing. There was an original copy of that sold on eBay a week prior to this recording. It ended over $1,000. It's become one of those just horribly unattainable records. Funny enough, it's not one of the singles that has a really long track record, though. It's not like the Satan single or the Hollow Ground single where it's been ridiculously priced for hundreds of dollars for decades. The Virtue single you could get cheap if you could find it. It was kind of a late discovery for a lot of collectors, it seemed. Not really sure why it went overlooked. Maybe because of the late release date. Let's see. Some things for me to wrap up with here. Let's do this one first. This album came out in 90 or 91 by a British band called Ritual. It's called Valley of the Kings. And I actually bought this original CD copy from Rich Walker of Solstice years ago when he was on the Shadow Kingdom message board. Ritual were around during the new wave of British heavy metal. They put out one LP called Widow. That was a very obscure release to the point that there's a long history with it, too long to go fully into here, but the original LP was very hard to find. It got reissued by Shadow Kingdom kind of in the early, maybe mid 2000s and kind of breathed some new life into them. But it turned out they had released some other stuff too, including an album, like I said, 1991 called Valley of the Kings, and it's very, very good. Both albums, feature really nice guitar work, but it's kind of more of a mellow guitar work. These are not headbanging tracks. These are not, ragers or anything. The main guy in the band is named Gypsy Rebeth. Really, really good guitarist. Just, plays, kind of, a little bit, of a softer, more subtle style, but really good at, creating a lot of atmosphere and mood. He's known for doing like a lot of custom guitar work for a period of time. So yeah, everyone kind of focuses on the Widow album because that's the artifact from back in the early 80s that is impossible to track down. But yeah, the later album is very, very good in itself. And you don't see it around very often either. One thing to be mindful of with Ritual, there is a lot of misinformation about the band out there. And some of that, Rebeth has been reportedly known to sort of hype the band in ways that don't reflect reality, if you get what I'm saying. The liner notes to one of the reissues talks about like all these like singles and stuff they released back in the day, which nobody has ever seen a copy of. And so it's like, what you talking about there, buddy? Even seriously, if you go over to even on Metal Archives right now, there is the first thing under their discography. There's a single listed from 1981 called Burning that supposedly has songs called Burning and Come to the Ritual on it. And there's a picture. So supposedly there's a picture sleeve for this single. If that's a real single, I will eat the top hat that this Deep Switch dude is wearing on the back.
You're eating a lot of top hats tonight, my friend.
I'm throwing down the gauntlet. I'm sorry, but I mean, that is not an image from 1981. There's no way it is. The color, the composition, everything about that screams, maybe late 90s or 2000s era Photoshop. That is not a single cover from 1981. I can't believe that it is. So yeah, even Metal Archives has this thing listed that I think is a fake. I do not think it is real whatsoever. And again, if he's saying like, oh, well, we had one of our singles, but it came out like in South Africa. Huh? And even if that were true, by this point, the internet is good at finding things. Somebody would have, found it, turned it up, gotten a legit copy of it. It's hard to believe that it would still be lurking out there unknown, or that this image shown on the archives is real. So it leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth that, there's, some untruths that have been spread about the band's back catalog. But the music on both Valley of the Kings and Widow, really, really cool stuff. Again, it's kind of just a more laid back, simple, atmospheric style than what you hear from a lot of bands, but really good. And then for my very last one, which will be short, I cannot talk late 80s British metal without talking about my favorite album from the period, which is Desolation Angels, self-titled album. Really cool cover, Reaper, big dragon-winged horse. This is another one of the bands that were around earlier. They released a single in 84. They had been around since, I think, 82 or so. The record deal didn't materialize until a bit late. Came out on a really small label called Tameside Record. Got almost immediately bootlegged in Brazil by Rock Brigade Records.
What about South America? I hear there's a big scene down there.
Yeah, but kind of, what a weird thing to immediately. I mean, it's not like it was like 10 years later they had developed a cult following. It's like in 87, Rock Brigade was pressing this in Brazil. It's like, of all the weird things for them to latch onto. I mean, it's a great record. It sounds a lot like kind of, classic Black Sabbath in a way, doomy, but also still pretty powerful at the same time. And this band had ended up with a weird history. We've talked about how America ended up having a big influence on the UK scene in the later 80s. After this album ended up going nowhere, the band relocated to Los Angeles for a number of years and tried to make a go of it in the music scene in the US. So they didn't just try to sound like an American band. They tried to become an American band. They released some material. Some people like it a lot. It doesn't do much for me. They had some lineup changes. At one point, they changed vocalists. There's an album's worth of material. It's called The Fire Still Burns. It's been at least 2 versions of it recorded. I have tried because I love this. I love the single, but yeah, the stuff they did while in California, it's just not on the same plane. It feels very plain. It's not that it sucks. They didn't go down the Motley Crue path or anything. It just feels very, very plain. And as such, they never caught on. That went back to the UK. Another band that has reformed. I think Paul Taylor from Elixir does vocals for them now. And the last album they did a couple of years ago is actually not bad. Frank, again, longtime viewer and contributor, sent me or kind of got me aware of that album. He's like, hey, have you heard the new Desolation Angels? I'm like, no. He's like, you should check that one out at least. It's not bad. And he's right, it's not. So they're getting a little bit of attention here later on, which is nice to see. And they lived happily ever after. That'll be how I end. But Marty, you got one more crack at this. So what do you need to show us?
Well, we would have been remiss not mentioning the Peaceville 3. So we got the 3 debuts.
Yes.
Lost Paradise by Paradise Lost. The Serenades and the Crestfallen EPs by Anathema. And of course, I showed it earlier, My Dying Bride's debut EP. Basically, you've got three kindred spirit bands, and one thing they all share amongst them is dramatic romanticism, we'll say. Maybe this album is a little bit more death metalish, but they do the next album, the follow-up album, Gothic, get a little bit more romanticized, more Gothic elements. You got, of course, the violin here to really bring a melancholic slant to the music. It's essentially death doom bands, but with very open-minded thoughts on musical exploration or cross-pollination, bringing Gothic elements in, some folk elements in, some world music, via maybe Dead Can Dance a little bit brought into here as well. And it's the three bands to this day are all, well, Anathema is no more, but they've put out some amazing records over the years. Or did Anathema get back together?
I'm going to check.
Interestingly enough, also three bands that changed their style quite
freely.
Abruptly.
Yeah, freely and abruptly.
Quickly and in different directions, yeah.
Yep. But all tend to return back to Anathema never returned back, but Paradise Lost and My Dying Bride did come back to their roots as they went on. But
the Metal Archive still lists Anathema as split up. And if Metal Archive says a band is split up, for sure they're split up, because I wouldn't change that status otherwise.
And I just wanted to throw in there too, I don't own any Cradle of Filth, so I couldn't have shown that. And really, you talk about English bands, they're one that should be mentioned in the conversation. Again, it's like the Anne Rice version of black metal, the vampire, vampiric, the gothed out, the flowy white shirts with, you know what I'm trying to say. Anne Rice,
more top hats
indeed.
Please don't eat them, Alan.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything. I don't have to throw down any Cradle of Filth gauntlets here, but yes,
people
obviously
still like them and they're still productive, and it's basically the Danny Filth show, but that's fine. He's maintaining what they've always been. Another band from England I always liked would be Balsagoth. This is a Black Moon Broods under Lemuria, basically taking English black metal, mixing it with a hint of power metal, a lot of Martin Walker level narration between songs. Anal Nothrock, another one of those bands that took black metal and industrialized it. Drum machine, there's no real drums on here, it's all programmed stuff. And
is
one
it
of
like
my
a box set or something.
It's a 2 CD set.
Oh, cool.
It's got the Codex Necro and When Fire Rains Down from the Sky, Mankind Will Reap It As Its Own, which has got Attila singing some songs on it from Mayhem.
Cool.
And one of the best products of the black metal scene in England, this came out in 2009. I put out the CD of this, and that would be Lost by Wodenstone. This band blew me away the first time I heard them on MySpace, and I quickly reached out to them and asked if I could put out anything by them, and they allowed me to put out their debut CD, which is this record. I always thought of them as the English Emperor, very sweeping, atmospheric, older Emperor. This is just a really, really great band, and they put out a split, a 7-inch, and 2 full-length albums. Lost was their second and final record. Again, this is just a fantastic band. Bands like Winterfell took off, and these guys were adjacent, they're friends, but they didn't get the recognition that bands like Winterfell gotten. And another band, Seor, or Sure, or however you say it, Seor. He was
tin whistles.
kind of in that family as well. And very, very good stuff. Wodenstone broke up, and when they did, it splintered 2 more projects, Nemeris and Ahamkara, which I'm working with both of those projects, which I'm very proud to be doing. And the spirit of Wodenstone lives on in both of those projects as well. So will we ever get a comeback Wodenstone record? Who knows? But right now, what's coming out is excellent stuff as well. But there we go.
Yeah, I look at British metal after 1985. So yeah, Kristian's really fun topic. Again, thank you so much for bringing it up.
That bad, really, for England, after all.
No.
Yeah, I think we can say at the end that it's not as
quite a few good bands.
Yeah, we
Quite a
cast kind of
few
a
good-
dark cloud starting off, and which is possibly not fair, but
Yeah, let's talk 3.5 hours. Let's talk about this country that just released crap.
yeah, but they
It wouldn't
didn't.
have made for a good episode, would it?
No, it wouldn't have. Of course,
No.
that would have gotten more views because people love the negativity. So
Yeah, but yeah, I think you know that what we've seen here though, with tons of these things that we have discussed, is that yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that came out of the UK scene through the late '80s and into the '90s, but that yeah, a lot of them just never got off the ground. A lot of the stuff at that time flew under the radar, maybe overshadowed by other bands from other parts of the world. It doesn't mean that the UK didn't have a good heavy music scene going on. It just was pretty underground, and that's not
And
necessarily a
overlooked.
bad thing.
yeah, we didn't talk about labels at all. I mean, you got like Candlelight Records, Cacophonous Records. I mean, very instrumental in getting the black metal scene going. In yeah, Noise was not. They weren't an English label, but they had offices there, and
They had a footprint for a while. Yep.
Yeah. so yeah.
So yep, lots of good stuff. But yeah,
Kristian?
that's going to do it for this episode, I believe.
Kristian, do you have anything coming up, like a new YouTube channel you want to promote or something that you
No,
want to
I'll
talk about?
continue reviewing North American heavy metal singles on the Corroseum forum, or not on the forum, on the website. That's probably all I have time with.
That's a cool
Right now,
project.
yep. Sorry, no YouTube videos. I'll happily join you guys, but I won't be starting my own channels anytime soon.
That's okay. Yes, well, yeah, we'll have to bring you back for like a finish episode or something sometime. That would be very fun. But yeah, Marty, anything else? Again, that's a little weird for us since we're doing this. This won't be released for a few weeks, so I can't really release any show notes. We don't know what's coming next week because it's not going to be next week from when we're recording this. But we hope folks have enjoyed the episode. Marty and I have been hanging out in the live chat. And yeah, it's just kind of cool. Again, this is a topic Marty and I have touched on briefly, several times over the years, but it was really cool to kind of finally corral it all together and be able to, really sort through it. And I think we see that, when you bring it all together, there's a lot of good music here. It's not nearly as, thin or as bleak as sometimes it's made out to be. But with that, shall we shut her down?
Let's shut her down. Everybody, check out the Corroseum. And we'll get Kristian back on here again soon, hopefully. And check out Let's Talk Metal. Get yourself a heavy metallurgy patch for your vest. See you next time. See you next week. Cheers, everyone.
As I say in the UK, bonjour.
All right.